What's up, meta nerds? This video will pull from all material from canon and legends to do a complete breakdown of one of the greatest vehicles ever produced in the galaxy far, far away. This is one of the first vehicles to enter production with the purchase of a clone army by its mysterious benefactors, with the Kaminoans using the prestigious and ancient shipwright Kuat drive yards to provide all the ships and vehicles. Kuat had been a staple of the Old Republic thousands of years earlier, and with the roughly 10 centuries between the destruction of the Sith and dissolving of the Republic military via the Ruusan reformations, the shipwright was eager to earn the kind of credits you only see during a galaxy-spanning war. Kuat had many subsidiary companies that each had their own specializations, and Rothana Heavy Engineering would be charged with crafting most of the land vehicles, like the ATTE, SPHA, but also the LAAT and Acclimator, which is the first look at what we'll see were countless brilliant decisions that start all the way at the top with good leadership and project management, not as exciting as weapon engineering, but crucial to making sure that this army would work at such a large scale. By having Rothana build the Acclimator, LAAT, and ATTE, all these designers could work with each other, planning around each other's needs, and had shared supply lines. With the Acclimator having its power systems and crew right down the middle, this main area on the sides are dedicated to the racks and conveyor belt systems full of gunships, and had the tanks packing the nose and lining the perimeter, produced as units to make sure that each Acclimator that left Rothana was fully loaded. And there was a seamless transition, having that insanely fast 0.5 hyperdrive, scrambling across the galaxy, rapidly deploying LAAT infantry and LAAT carrier variants, with the spacefaring and decently fast gunship having enough power to be a flying tank on its own, escorting the LAATC with its ATTE, dropping it off in a matter of seconds with a quick release of the rounded mount on the middle legs, and it hit the ground running. Also keep in mind this holy vehicle Trinity were each the main troop transports, with the Acclimator carrying 1,600 troops, more than twice the Venator, and the LAAT and ATTE being the respective air and ground ways to move clones around the battlefront. And to go one step further, they could even pack in 2 ATRTs for scouting ahead or setting up ambushes. The official mission directive for this Republic Walker was to act as a multi-purpose assault vehicle, capable of carrying out everything from the movement of clone platoons across any terrain, even when under heavy enemy fire, and also have the firepower to destroy the enemy's position once it arrived. The shape of the Walker is based on the Arctic horny whelmer, a hardy animal native to the planet Rothana. Like a 6-legged armadillo with 2 separate armored sections and a tough cartilage part in the middle, they had based other vehicles on this in the past, like a very successful old patrol vehicle they made for a mining company, and so the ATTE's design is able to navigate terrain so well because its proportions and body were shaped on a creature that could scale the icy and rocky mountainous terrain, which is why there is this flexible concertina section at the middle of the Walker. At a height of 5.7 meters, a length of 13.2 meters, and 5.32 meters across, it was about 1/4 the height of the AT-AT, 3 Jawas longer than an AAT, and wider than the fattest Hutts. With its top speed of 60 kilometers per hour or 37 miles per hour, it was stomping along just faster than its hovering Seppi rival, but the TX-130 was 5 times as fast. Though the whole point of not using repulsor generators like most craft, and being a mechanically powered walker, it could walk through enemy shields, something impossible for craft utilizing electrogravitic fields to float. The ATTE was also impervious to normal ion attacks due to a robust electromagnetic shielding layered into the armor, and that it was grounded through the feet. Some other important stats before we head under the armor plating is that it had a 40-ton cargo capacity, fuel for 500 kilometers or 310 miles, rations and air supply for 3 weeks, which meant that it could act as a mobile space fort dropped down on asteroids, moons, or harsh planets. But let's start by looking at the feet, or foot pads. They were packed full of terrain sensors and tractor field generators, a tech usually seen in Star Destroyers in the form of a tractor beam projector used to capture smaller ships. But they scaled this tech down to fit into the footpad so that each step had the effect of bonding to the surface. This is why it can scale 90-degree sheer cliff walls, and this ability was designed to be able to walk up fortress walls. And it's crazy that we don't have an example of this, but it said it was designed to also provide a unique angle of attack, climbing into massive cave systems or underworlds of ecumenopolises like Coruscant, so that they could hang upside down from the ceiling like a spider and rain down fire from above. Or as Skywalker showed, it could easily climb over enemy capital ships just using a magnetic feature, which was also put into these feet. So you see, Rothana took that directive literally. This thing could go anywhere, being completely sealed off with a pressurized interior, that 3-week supply of oxygen, which even if you were in a Type 1 atmosphere, it would still help with everything from dust, smoke, fire, and of course be necessary in outer space, when underwater, or in toxic atmospheres. And later in the war against bioweapon attacks, which the CIS did deploy a few times. It required 7 specially trained crew members, like pilots and CCs or clone commanders. These specialized tanker clones were trained for this role since birth. The pilot worked the 6 legs, while the spotter sat above him and worked the sensor suite station to scan through different data displays providing intel on friendly and enemy activity, atmospheric conditions, and different wavelengths of light. The spotter would then relay the info to the 4 gunners tucked in each corner, with the front 2 working the pair of anti-personnel laser cannons, while the ones towards the rear worked a single cannon, making for 6 in total. The final crew member had the best job but the lowest lifespan, sitting exposed behind the controls of the mass driver cannon up top. He got here via this simple ladder, opening this hatch and slipping in. While there was an effort to provide some armor protection, being enveloped on the sides, back, and even this headrest wrapping around to try and save his head, he would still be exposed to shrapnel and explosives that might not punch through the armor plating, but would easily blow through his plastoid body armor. Each of these sections would hold 10 troops, for 20 total, with their blasters standing up on these racks located here. Under the floor is where you find the ammo storage for the main cannon, which the troops had to manually reload onto this ammunition belt to be fed into the cannon. These could be any combination of munitions, from burrowing bunker busters, heat-seeking projectiles, sonic charges, or your standard high explosive shells. And what would become very common was a sort of plasma bolt generating round that made it work like a standard laser cannon. A shell that helps to think of it more like a magazine, being packed full of a certain number of shots that are activated with each trigger pull, and then ejected when you went through all these shots. This combo allowed it to work like a mobile artillery vehicle, and the targeting system was accurate enough to calculate for these different rounds, and even shoot down slow-moving aircraft or intercept incoming rocket fire. A really unique design feature are the acceleration compensators packed into each of the troop sections. Usually only seen in starfighters, this tech was another form of gravity manipulation like seen in the feet, but in this case it's for reducing the G-forces felt by the troops. This is required in starfighters and capital ships, which could kill a person with their acceleration, the person normally surviving about 5 Gs, while the Executor class had a top acceleration of 1000 Gs. The compensators in the Walker were likely far less powerful than on a capital ship, but worked as a way of reducing recoil when hit by a massive round, or when falling off a surface and smashing into the ground. It's not the role this tech was invented for, but it had the effect of preventing a deadly whipping of the neck or flying out of your seat and being crushed to death by the reduction of that felt acceleration. The canopy cockpit up front opens via this hinge, and the way you get up is that this bar would pivot down to act like a stepladder. These notches are for holding clamps inside of the capital ship hangar. You can see the actuator pistons here. There are 4 exits, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear, for the troops to spill out and not just have one ramp for the enemy to focus all their fire on. And if we look close, we can see the life support air reprocessor here. We also get the comment that clones complain that they did not have specialized armor that was more streamlined and smaller for operating in these tight positions. You'd imagine they were taking that helmet off as soon as they were away from a stuck-up clone commander, but the whole suit was said to be cumbersome and just felt silly to wear your little blaster-proof armor while within one of the best armored vehicles in the galaxy. There were variants with a main loading ramp that could move supplies, ATRTs, or speeders, and some were built out to act as a mobile command center, establishing a network with that synergistic trio, the acclimator being the HQ for the Republic forces, talking to the forward command dropped off via LAATC, which in turn coordinated with the mobile command centers inside of various walkers during a large-scale offensive. This trio of Rthana craft were some of the first ships and vehicles ready for use, and they made sure that every iteration from prototypes to the final product were being shipped to Kamino to use in their sprawling training centers, which utilized everything from adjustable terrain features, holographic projectors, droid enemies, and weather simulators to prep the clones for any planet in the galaxy. These were large enough to accommodate battalions and multiple armored units, working in conjunction with the UT-AT, SPHA, Juggernaut, and various speeders. When the clones say, "Just like the simulation," sometimes they mean the video game style, but also these massive multi-day war games. In 22 BBY, Grandmaster Yoda arrived on Kamino and ordered the immediate scrambling of a sizable portion of the army that he had only learned about a few days earlier. And though it was their first time seeing real combat, all the pieces were moving with deadly efficiency. Most of the droid units seen during the Battle of Geonosis were completely legal. In fact, they had been used to enforce trade deals, protect Trade Federation assets, or buy the Mune bankers in seizing property from someone that fell back on their payments, or just taxes. And with all that experience killing poor people and pirates, the banking clan's Hailfire droid was a seasoned vet, and knew how to exploit a weak spot. One of the simplest and effective vehicles in the galaxy, it just connected 30 powerful rockets to a droid brain solely dedicated to seek and destroy, drop it on fast all-terrain wheels, and we see that the first ATTE tank commanders were meeting a shockingly fast and fiery end, with rockets blowing through the legs with so much power that the tanker's underside slammed into the rocky ground, igniting the fuel reserves that line this bottom layer. Everything from the fuel for the engines and all that fancy gravitation tech, not to mention the Tabana gas used to power those 6 anti-personnel cannons, was all stored in this belly, and then chain reaction explosions would set off the mass driver shells, which were packed under the floorboards. Others showed off that droid brain by having the rockets rain down and hit it on its weakest part, the flexible connecting middle, or punching right through the ball turret to successfully exploit the line of Tabana gas and energizers that would be in this weapon. Of course, every walker that landed a hit on them was an instant kill, but the slower rate of fire had it looking like the tank battalion would be overwhelmed, until the gunship swooped in and took advantage of the droid's lack of shielding or armor, easily slicing through to cut off the advance. Once the walkers were in position, that terrain was solidly in Republic hands. Coordinating with the Acclimator and those forward stations, they were able to count the first Battle of the Clone Wars as a decisive Republic victory. A celebration of the saviors of the Republic was held in the form of a military parade on Coruscant, a show of strength for both Republic citizens and a threat to shakily allied senators, while only the most attuned masters could sense that this could also be a threat to democracy and the Jedi Order. When Palpatine first laid eyes on this army, of the ATTE walkers specifically, he said, quote, "These weapons of war would be awe-inspiring if they were not so terrifying." Almost immediately after this, these walkers would be crucial in the defense of Christophsis, though again we see that many were lost. As this battle drew on, the clone Slick would reveal that he had joined forces against his brothers, convinced by Asajj Ventress that the clones were nothing more than slaves fighting for corrupt Coruscanti elites. When he was cornered by Rex and Cody, he fled through the ammo depot, and was able to detonate explosives set on several walkers and gunships. On a battlefront where even the slightest advantage could decide the victor, the next days would see even more walkers lost, though clever thinking by the Jedi would force the Separatists surrender, and they were quickly reinforced by more troops and armored units. The assault on Teth would be one of the most stunning uses of these walkers, with the monastery being in a perfect defensive position, anti-aircraft batteries crowning the top of an enormous plateau, so the Republic had to rely on the gravity-locking footpads to make the long 90-degree ascent, with Ahsoka Tano using her saber to keep the pilots safe from incoming fire, and making it to the top just in time to save her brazen master. But they needed to immediately switch to defense. After just destroying all the anti-aircraft weaponry to take the monastery, now the Seppies were descending with multiple C-9979 landing craft, intent on making this ancient holy site their grave. As the B-1s and Spiders start to make it into the main courtyard, we see the mass driver cannon firing rapidly like a laser cannon. Not as powerful as shells, but this higher rate was why that variable munition option was so great. And we see that while the front canopy windows are immune to small arms fire, the heavy blaster cannon of the Dwarf Spider explodes through and kills these 2 clones. After faking a surrender to buy them some time and drop the droid's defenses, Rex and his boys are able to hold them off by hiding beneath this downed behemoth, until Cody's forces were able to come to their rescue. Sometime after this, droid units started calling these 6 legs and 6s. It might not be 8-legged, but instead of dreaming of electric sheep, these B-1s were having nightmares of 6-leggers as horror stories were shared between battalions, which is a really interesting insight into the droids' minds, in that even though they weren't organics, there was still some element of psychological warfare. The next major use was during the Battle of Ryloth, where we again see some very smart tactics from the Separatists. Mace Windu and the 91st Mobile Recon Corps were leading an armor division through a narrow canyon pass on their way to liberate the capital city of Lesu. AATs waited to open fire until all the walkers were far along the path, and then took down the lead walker, bringing them to a halt, and then worked to close the rear.
Now order our cannon to target their rear units. We'll box them in and blast them to pieces.
Mace ordered his recon troops to deploy the ATRTs, then used his powers in the Force to break the canopy glass and free the unconscious pilot. Was probably very glad he was wearing his full armor that day, before calling deep on the Force to push the massive walker out of the path and free up the rest of his units. Expert use of frog walkers outmaneuvered the AATs and cleared the way for the tanks to push towards the capital city, where Wat Tambor and his tactical droid were examining the weaknesses of this infamous Sixer that would soon be shelling their defenses. With the help of local resistance fighter Cham Syndulla, the 91st boys approached the city to make sure it was free of droids and provide rations for the Twi'leks, only to witness the latest of CIS war crimes, as hyenas slaughtered the civilians before they could even think of joining Syndulla's resistance. By now, stories had spread of ATTE battalions leveling whole mountains to get to the target, so the T-Series calculated that their best option was to use the captive Twi'leks as living shields, putting their encampments all around the walls. The combined 91st and local forces launched their attacks as MTTs were returning to the capital, hoping to cross the energy bridge in time, only for the droids to show how willing they were to sacrifice each other.
Oh well, too bad for them.
But the 2 troops and Mace were able to reactivate the bridge, and the RTs and Blurgs storm over and fight their way into the city. with Mace taking Wat Tambor hostage, and when the walkers were finally within the walls, all could celebrate this hard-fought win, with the ATTEs playing a part in the victory parade. Though we do not see this, there are several reports of how this walker was susceptible to mines. He got 6 legs to step on a mine, each walking pretty close to the other, and it wasn't that far off the ground, so worse than losing the foot, the mines usually penetrated that belly full of fuel, with similar effects to what we saw with the Hailfire missiles. The ATHE was an evolutionary link between the Republic and Imperial walkers, having longer legs than the TE, but not as long as the AT-AT. For whatever reason, there are no images of this vehicle, but I believe this has to do with the fact that Kuat and Rathona had some insider intel. A certain embodiment of the dark side may have told them to focus on building a towering fortress and to not worry about the next iteration of wartime tank, because it is said that they began work on the AT-AT before the AT-HE was even finished. After Cad Bane captured the holocron and Kyber crystal required to locate all known Force-sensitive children, Anakin would deploy these walkers in another novel way.
You are not thinking of using those to transport the clones to that frigate.
Well, they are pressurized.
And they're equipped with magnetic feet. Good call.
As the walkers were released, they gently floated down to make contact, and we see that they are using the rapid-fire laser charges during this rescue mission of Master Opal, not wanting to blow up the ship with explosive shells. These walkers would go down with the enemy ship, but the mission was mostly a success. Kadi Mundi and Kenobi would lead one of the largest offensives of the entire war, during the Second Battle of Geonosis.
Once we have landed, we shall knock out the shield generator. That is our primary target.
Y-Wing bombers would first try to take out the gun emplacements near the LZ, but Geonosian cannons were still operational and firing away on the LAATs racing through the flak, along with growing numbers of Nantek starfighters.
Get the tanks on the ground, now!
Mundi's forces were shot down short of the LZ, and Kenobi's were shot down as well, but crash landed a bit closer, while Skywalker was in position but lost all of his ATTEs.
Skywalker's tanks are gone, and they're trying to contact General Kenobi's forces for support.
Falling back on one of the oldest and most successful tactics, they circled the wagons, or walkers and gunships, to create an impromptu armored base to try and hold off the bugs swarming with sonic blasters, speeders, and AATs, while also trying to coordinate with Yularen and Atmosphere to locate the downed generals. As the clones fought through the chaos, they find the only survivor of this 212th group were Kenobi and a single clone. Mundi used his saber to cut through some of the anti-tank barricades and made it near Skywalker's position, as the lead Venator was now being strafed by the Nantex fighters. Skywalker was able to bring down that defensive wall blocking their path to the shield generator, and the flame troopers were clearing out the tunnels. From this vantage point, Kai could see that the LZ was about to be overwhelmed, and is able to call in air support just in time.
The reinforcements have arrived!
By now, most of the walkers had been disabled, but Kenobi believed there was still enough to pull off the victory.
You'll be able to temporarily jam their scanners so they are unable to target the incoming tanks. Once the tanks knock out the shield, Master Mundi can bring the rest of the troops in with the gunships.
This is one of the best examples of that genius decision by Rathona to make a tank without repulsor tech. The ATTEs were able to walk through the shields and open fire on the generator with their high explosive shells, and the gunships perfectly coordinated to swoop in just as the protective plasma layer fell apart. The next target was the main droid and weapons factory. Luminara and Dooley's forces were coming in with fresh gunships, tanks, and hundreds of troops. As they pushed through, it was looking like an easy victory, but the first bad sign was the ambush launch from the tall, rocky spires. And while the tanks were encircling the fortress and defending the clones from enemy infantry, for the role of actually punching through the thick fortress walls, that task went to a row of AV-7 cannons. But then a new model of Bactoid tank emerged through the thick plate doors. The simply named Super Tank would unleash a barrage of mortar fire that was unrelenting for several minutes, easily destroying the unarmored cannons, and just through accuracy by volume, were able to land devastating hits on the weak spots of the ATTEs. While the armor of the Super Tank was impenetrable to even the mass driver cannon, having no weak spots on any forward-facing section, perhaps only near the launchers themselves, which is why we see it has an armored hood that only peels back when firing. Ahsoka and Barriss Offee used this weapon to hit the main generator and bring down the entire factory, surviving by being inside of this indestructible new tank. In Felucia, we got to see the walker being used in the role of long-range artillery, and quickly switching into an armored troop carrier role to take a CIS fortress. And after years as a beloved workhorse of the Jedi Generals, its most famous use would be to try and kill Kenobi, when Cody executed Order 66 and immediately moved to kill the traitorous general. Though it wasn't a high explosive shell, it also wasn't one of those smaller anti-personnel laser firing shells either. This equivalent of a heavy laser cannon bolt may have been subtly guided by the Force, as Obi-Wan would just barely make it out alive. As soon as the Republic became the Empire, these walkers near instantly went from a symbol of proud fighters of democracy to symbols of oppression. Walkers all across the galaxy were moved to protect political centers, and used as an implied threat of force against the citizens. And when they deemed that the protest became a riot, those 6 anti-personnel cannons would open fire. Or like we see on Raxus Secundus, the Coruscant of the CIS had millions of citizens that were not instantly kneeling to their new emperor, including their leader.
I can no longer condone this unjust occupation.
As the people started to resist the clones, the ATTE stepped in to help squash any thoughts of rebellion, and notice that all the Republic coloring is grayed out, both on the troopers and the vehicles. When Bad Batch rescued Senator Avi Singh, they had to get past Walker patrols, and as they escaped, they commandeer one, exploiting their intimate knowledge of this vehicle to take out the entire crew, Wrecker chucking them out of the forward side hatch. The Imperial clone gunners were able to load a heavy plasma charge and angle the gun to sink a shot that disabled the rear legs, forcing Bad Batch to jack another one, only for a third Walker to land a second shot. With Tech's repairs, they are able to get the damaged Walker operational, spewing thick black smoke and leaking oil as it dragged itself to a spot designated by the Senator. When the enemy Walker caught up, a shot to the midsection scrapped it, but using the wreckage and a thermal charge, they were able to collapse their escape tunnel entrance and lose the Imperial clones. Some Imperial variants would open up the sides of the rear section, keeping a protective front, but then allowing the troops to open fire from this raised platform as they moved into the rebellious populations. While this made it able to engage threats on the side, of course this opened it up to grenades, while others had a flat top for moving large amounts of cargo. Over the following months, these engineering marvels were being scrapped, along with all the other remnants of the Clone Wars on the junk world Braca, sharing a mass grave with their enemy, as everything from Venators to Lucra Hulks ended up here. 15 years later, by 4 BBY, Ahsoka wanted the Spectres to reach out to old allies hiding out on the planet Selos. And Kanan, an Order 66 survivor, is teleported back to his youth when he sees the allies' mobile home.
Now that is a work of art.
Looks like an old Republic tank, used during the Clone Wars.
When they approach, the man who saw clones kill his master is quick to ignite his blade, triggering Wolf to take some shots. But Rex gets Wolf and Gregor to calm down, while Ezra reminds Kanan that Ahsoka told them to trust these allies. When they get inside, we see that it looks like a mobile command variant of Walker, or perhaps a variant that had the top flattened for cargo, with the clones adding parts back like the main gun and other repairs. There are tons of accents to make it feel like home, from wind chimes to lights, and practical mods to make it a multi-story home with balcony handrails to dry your clothes and towels, and a flat seating area that doubles as a landing pad. Here the Walker was used to hunt the massive Jupas, and either just due to age or the mods, it is pumping out black smoke with each shaky step. It looks like some legs were replaced, and the front step-down ladder on the canopy now works as a lookout spot for the hunts. They connect Zeb to an energy line that acts as a harpoon, and with some teamwork they do bring in the beast. But before the Spectres can leave with Rex's coordinates for potential rebel bases, the betrayal by Wolf brought the imps to this remote world. Wolf didn't want his brothers dragged into the rebel conspiracy, and got ahead of any accusations by contacting the nearest officials. Though he apologized and regretted it, the Empire was already on the way. The first TIE got shot down by a rocket launcher, and in the lull before the next wave, Rex gives the new generation a lesson on the mass driver cannon.
The Traverse controls are over here on the left, and the elevations on the right.
But it isn't long before they spot a trio of AATs closing in on them. Facing off against their Imperial replacements, Rex has to admit he is impressed with this new behemoth.
Reinforced armor plating, heavy cannons, and anti-personnel blasters.
Turning to race into the sandstorm, they are able to take advantage of the Jedi's powers to sense the enemy when all other sensor systems were down. By trusting the Force, Ezra puts a perfect shot into the AAT's weakness, the flexible neck. When they emerge from the sandstorm, the clones help the Spectres get off in their ship, but they know that the old heroes have no chance against the two walkers. While the clones were deciding to go out in a bang, full steam ahead, eating powerful bolts that drop it, only to rise up again, spewing smoke and slamming into the legs of the Goliath, while trying to fire at the second. But as you can see, the energy shots are harmlessly dispersing across the surface. And as the AT-AT seems immovable, the mass driver cannon loses power. Rex screams at the imps to come out and fight him, before accepting that he will be disintegrated by these turrets. He closes his eyes as the Spectres return to blast into the enemy, dropping down to hijack one and use it to open fire on the other, providing a shocking defeat for the Imperial forces that would lead to Vader's Inquisitors getting personally involved. In the views of some military strategists, the AT-AT overcorrected for the worry of mines. It wasn't as stable, but did hit the main objective of everything Imperial at this time. It struck fear into the population. You drop one of these down and it acted like an instant castle, towering over a city and able to rain death from above like some angry god. As the Rebel Alliance was formally organized, and the Galactic Civil War was raging on, this discarded masterpiece was being rebuilt by mechanics all across the stars, and pressed into the fight to restore the Republic. At least one fell into the hands of a Weequay gang, who placed it at the Sreeler spaceport to extort payments from visiting spacers, which resulted in it having its back legs blown off thanks to a concussion missile fired by Chewbacca. Months after the Battle of Endor, and 5 ABY, the New Republic was pitted against these during the Battle of Kuat Drive Yards. Perhaps the most logistically important battle of the entire war, the Imperial Remnant threw everything they had into the defense of the largest supplier of Republic and Imperial ships and vehicles. In the shipyards that made up the massive orbital ring, AT-ATs and AT-TEs crawled along the surface to try and shoot down NR forces. Though this final battle with the Walker was the loss, it would be forever loved and respected by factions all across the galaxy. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, one of the longest running standoffs on vehicle lore concerns that mass driver cannon. A lot of the early cross-section books were just worked on from images of ships and vehicles, without actually seeing them in action, and a lot of what happens on screen was for plot and cool special effect purposes, and the lore comes second. Movies and later shows were king, and though the Walker always looks like it's just firing a laser cannon, the whole idea of it being a mass driver firing a physical shell has never faded away. It was re-established in every Legends and even now the new canon books, though it's finally addressed on why it looks like a laser by vaguely saying that it could load shells that fired plasma bolts, which is what I meant by saying it kinda works like a magazine. Many of the same stop-motion animators for the AT-ATs in Empire Strike Back were brought in to work with the CGI team in Attack of the Clones, to try and capture the same feel of the movement. But there was also a deliberate choice to make them not seem invincible, like each side of the Clone Wars was devastatingly powerful, and it would not just be an easy win for the good guys, which is why we see them blown up so quickly upon their first deployment on Geonosis. In the Battlefront games, they act as mobile spawn points, and in Battlegrounds they can be built in mech factories. All the technical info comes from the Attack of the Clones Visual Dictionary, complete cross-sections, Imperial Handbook, Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Rise of the Separatists. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, or share the video. These are the best ways to help me out. Subscribe to see more videos like this, check out the membership, or one of these videos that I'm sure you're gonna love. But most important of all, remember, no armor can stop plot-based projectiles, and the Force will be with you, always.
Concentrate fire on the center of the storm!
When all subtlety has gone out the window and you need to break through the heaviest defenses, look no further than the awe-inspiring power of the AT-AT. What's up, meta nerds? In this complete breakdown of the all-terrain armored transport, we'll be pulling from both Legends and canon sources, talking about its stats, capabilities, and role on the battlefield. Sit back, relax, and get ready for a tale that stretches all the way from Jabeam to Jakku. The all-terrain armored transport serves as the mainstay of Imperial assaults on the most heavily defended positions, towering over the battlefront and delivering lethal salvos of laser fire. This hulking walker stood at an intimidating 22.5 meters, essentially a reinforced troop compartment atop a quarter of powerful legs, with a head-like command module mounted on the front, bearing the walker's weaponry and sensor systems. It carried up to 40 troops, plus additional equipment on a 2-tiered transport deck, and was extremely well armored, impervious to all but the heaviest attacks. So let's look at every system, but like all good breakdowns, we'll start with the armament. The heaviest weaponry of the Walker is carried directly below the chin, coming in the form of 2 Taemin-Back MS-1 heavy laser cannons. These cannons were extremely powerful, capable of dealing with ground targets such as medium tanks and heavily protected bunkers with ease, and at a range of up to 17 kilometers. That's over 10 miles. These cannons were fire-linked, offering a pair of modes, both single and dual fire in conjunction, all with firing data from the cockpit. In some AT-ATs, these Taemin-Backs were switched with the MK3EW heavy laser cannons, which bore a no less destructive reputation. These were fixed, although the head could swivel on the move to engage targets in a deceptively broad 180-degree field of fire. The heavy cannons were augmented by a pair of FF4 medium repeating blaster cannons, positioned in a swivel mount on each cheek of the command module. These cannons, with their even broader field of fire and independent adjustability, could engage lighter ground vehicles, installations, and even airspeeders. Their built-in rangefinder afforded them independent accuracy against such secondary targets, picking off positions to clear the main cannons to engage the heaviest targets. In some AT-ATs, these FF4s were replaced by Mk2EW medium blaster cannons, and these variations seemed to depend on the factory line from which they were produced. While the AT-AT could dish out considerable damage, it could also take return fire exceedingly well, being one of the most well-protected vehicles in the Empire's service. Dense 9095 T8511 grade Durasteel armor plated the entirety of this massive war machine, thick enough to be invulnerable to most weaponry. During the Battle of Hoth, Rebel forces turned P-Tower anti-vehicle emplacements against these walkers, and even though they could penetrate the armor of AT-STs and repulsor tanks, they had no effect on this walker's legs. 3 ATTE rounds at point-blank range likewise failed to even dent the heavy armor of this walker. In another impressive feat, a volley of 4 proton torpedoes from the Ghost failed to halt the advance of another AT-AT on Sphyrna. They were simply impervious to most weaponry, its armor harmlessly dissipating attacks, which was necessary to move them through heavily defended lines, breaching the enemy's perimeter and delivering their onboard infantry to their targets. Mines, likewise, were virtually useless, the heavy Durasteel footpads simply muffling the blasts, and the armored belly of the vehicle being too high to be impacted by such explosions, a notable design improvement from the ATT. Only concentrated heavy artillery or ground fire from tanks and heavy guns was capable of bringing down this walker in conventional combat. This durability was so considerable that perhaps its greatest attribute was its psychological effect, invoking terror and making the rebels feel impotent, with a single walker being able to snuff out the sparks of rebellion in cities all across the galaxy. Of course, this is also what made the Jedi invaluable to the Rebel Alliance. If you could get close in with a lightsaber, like Kanan Jarrus on Sphyrna or Luke Skywalker on Hoth, then any AT-AT will be in for a bad time. While the walker was durable and lethal, it was also very top-heavy, with its weight concentrated on the upper third of the AT-AT above its towering legs. To guarantee the stability of the walker as well as accuracy on the move, the gait of the AT-AT was carefully managed. Impulse terrain sensors on each footpad worked in conjunction with ground-penetrating radar scans in order to give the pilots in the cockpit an expert view of the terrain ahead. While moving, the pilots enjoyed a 3D understanding of the ground beyond the walker, including factors such as density and composition of the soil, rock, earth, or snow. This combination of excellent sensors allowed it to operate in a number of environments, including through water and amid deep snow, without concern for losing its footing from sudden pitfalls or unexpectedly loose rock or soil. It definitely lived up to the all-terrain reputation of their line, surprising opposing forces when moving through rugged ground, and giving Imperial commanders greater approach options. Of course, it should technically be called the most terrain's armored transport, as there were still certain environments that it was just unsuitable for, such as extremely steep hillsides, and even deep bogs and swamps could arrest the vehicle's motion, and certainly couldn't crawl up sheer cliff walls or hang upside down like its beloved Republic predecessor. But the walker's considerable height also proved an advantage in easily passing over trench lines, non-explosive anti-tank obstacles, and had the sheer power to just smash through buildings and anything built up to try and stop it. Enemy vehicles in defilade or behind cover that might not be seen with visual sensors could be detected by its other sensors like the radar, and the AT-AT drivers would be sure to rain down fire from above. But it wasn't exactly a stealth vehicle, as just the motion from the impact of the footpads would shake the ground with such force that it was noticeable kilometers away. But again, especially under the Tarkin Doctrine, this was seen as mostly a plus, just another way to strike terror in civilians and break the ranks of rebels, as the torturous booms slowly increased in strength, giving a young rebel plenty of time to go home and rethink his life. Armies could throw all their weaponry at the AT-AT battle line only to watch it be harmlessly absorbed. Combine that with the psychological terror, and you'll understand why the Battle of Hoth was such a moral victory for the Rebel Alliance, as it was the first major battle where these were taken down. Rex, Wolf, Gregor, and the Spectres did have some luck against these, but that was before the official start of the Galactic Civil War. It was on an obscure world, where the resistance and successful evacuation at Hoth would be a story told throughout the galaxy. The vehicle's weapons and motion was powered by a reactor system of 2 Kuat Drive Yard's FW-62 compact fusion drive systems. These drive systems, while powerful, could overload if breached and detonated. With this power, the heavy AT-AT could move at a considerable 60 km per hour, or 37 miles per hour, although that is on the best conditions on the most suitable terrain. 3 fuel slug tanks at the rear of the vehicle provided a continual power feed into the reactor. Being a solid form of fuel, think of the little pellets in a pellet grill, and this area was the most well protected, with extra plating of that special Durasteel armor to increase the walker's survivability. The head in which the command cabin was located contained the main crew, with a surprisingly low number of just 3 individuals. 2 pilots, specially trained and drawn from the grueling selection process of already proven veterans, who crewed the vehicle and fired its armaments. They were directed by a vehicle commander with access to a periscope and additional command and control communications. AT-AT crews developed a close connection with their vehicles and were encouraged to consider themselves as an extension of their vehicle and vice versa, often personally overseeing maintenance on these machines. AT-AT pilots wore helmets and suits which directly interfaced with the computers of the walker, like an augmented reality system, giving them a level of control like you might see in a fighter jet.
Uses 6 electro-optical sensors, giving the pilot an unprecedented 360 degrees of situational awareness. The pilot can actually look through the aircraft itself.
Those sensors giving them a simulated 360-degree field of vision, as well as the vehicle's vitals.
How's our hull looking? Badly damaged. We're at 70% integrity and falling.
Like electrical systems and fuel reserves. Wearing their full armor and helmet gave crews additional protection in the case of a breach, and did have some protection against radiation and fire. Unsurprisingly, AT-AT pilots consider themselves and their vehicles to be invulnerable, and gained a reputation for possibly well-deserved arrogance. 2 additional deck officers oversaw the troop compartment, allowing the piloting crew to focus on their primary duties. For all that firepower and capability, it was not a tank. Its primary purpose was to deliver infantry rather than slug it out with enemy vehicles. That was left for purpose-built Imperial walkers and repulsor craft. And its 40 troops were typically either stormtroopers or Imperial Army assault troopers, specially trained in deployment from this unique beast. A boom system could either drop the troops into combat directly from the belly, rolling out in several rapid waves, or the walker could kneel and the troops could disembark via a boarding ramp. In case of a breach, the onboard personnel could try and get out through a pair of escape hatches, one on each side of the compartment, to ensure that no matter which side the walker fell on, there was always a route to escape from the vehicle. Before deployment, troops were secured in 2 rows of seats, 2 on each deck, with a padded crash belt locking them into place, so injuries from impacts or a fall would be minimized. There's a clever design built into these benches that would wirelessly charge the packs and suits of storm and snowtroopers. A combat speeder bike garage at the AT-AT's rear held up to 5 speeders. These were typically deployed after the AT-AT had broken through enemy lines, released all its troops, and were now hunting down survivors. Once deployed via a harness system from the rear of the walker, the speeders would ferret out resistance, lay sensors or mines, and serve as scouts and pickets for the main assault force. The speeders were noted to well complement the plotting AT-ATs, screening and scouting for its parent vehicle, which could carry 2 disassembled AT-STs. And in addition to all that, the supplementary cargo capacity was measured at 1 ton, a little more than 1 dewback. The lumbering walkers required massive transports to bring them from their orbiting motherships down to the planetary battlefield. In most deployments, AT-ATs would be brought down singularly or in pairs aboard sizable Theta-class dropships. Although when deployed from the Dreadnought-sized vehicles, they could be brought down 4 at a time aboard Y-85 Titans. They could also be dropped directly into combat via Gazanti-class cruisers 2 at a time, going into action immediately and giving them a surprising degree of operational mobility, though they were typically deployed for ground assaults from orbit by large dropships. Walkers stationed within super-class warships, such as the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, were delivered to planetary surfaces within the previously mentioned Y-85. Smaller starships, such as the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, deployed single or paired walkers via the Theta-class, while other designs, including the Telgorn Corporation Warlord dropship, were capable of delivering an armored platoon of 4 walkers directly into battle zones as well. And sometimes they weren't even filled with troops. This whole space was filled with war material meant to reinforce some outpost. When deployed, they would often be in staggered formation, providing overlapping fields of fire. As you see, you can get that arc way above 180 degrees, and the pilots would work in synchrony with each other to methodically destroy enemy emplacements, especially useful since the walker contained no aft-mounted weaponry. This is why we often see them flanked by AT-STs or repulsor tanks, being able to fall back and let their big brother take out any anti-tank weaponry the enemy might have, while keeping security and making sure the enemy didn't ambush them from the rear. Now, he mentioned it survived that attack from the Ghost, but with its enormous size, it was pretty hard to miss and vulnerable to all form of aerial attack. there are many times where this walker has a TIE fighter escort, just to make sure they weren't bombed out by some old refurbished Y-Wing. A properly coordinated AT-AT advance would be a frightening spectacle of combined arms. And while some rebel propaganda, especially after Hoth, like to portray this thing as a big lumbering dope, stupidly designed with a limited field of fire and easy to topple, they and the Empire knew that the truth was that when used correctly, this is one of the most effective pieces in the entire military. In fact, it's none of these supposedly obvious design flaws that are actually considered flaws by the engineers or the rebels, as they knew the real move was to sneak into this thing, taking advantage of its small crew, or be lucky enough to be able to get a shot onto its neck tube, which couldn't be rigidly covered in that plate armor since it had to be flexible to move side to side. And of course, the genius tactic of using tow cables mounted aboard converted T-47 airspeeders was a form of rebel guerrilla tactics that you just can't plan for. Turning to their history, they were deployed in their prototype stage as early as the Battle of Jabeam in the midst of the Clone Wars, where they proved their effectiveness by remaining mobile amid the planet's thick mud, while vaporizing separatist war machines such as the OG-9 homing spiders and hailfires with ease. These early models with their squared-off cargo compartments nonetheless fell to the wayside due more to the Republic's devastating defeat than their own performance. The innovative General Maximilian Veers championed the AT-AT concept and brought it into service as a mainstay of Imperial forces after the Battle of Yavin, where it became the war machine we all know and fear. They fought off a rebel incursion on Karaida itself, where its potential to be tripped and disabled first became known. Production was seen on many major Imperial factory worlds, such as Balmara and of course Kuat. In true Imperial fashion, they made sure to modify them to take over the galaxy, being viable on any terrain, with a wide variety of more esoteric variants, which is going to get its own video coming soon, as there are just so many variants to try and fit in here. Some of these that were after Endor came with mounted turbolasers, ion cannons, thicker plate armor, and even an aquatic swimmer version, so all that's going to be in the next breakdown. AT-AT saw use as late as 130 ABY in Legends by Darth Krayt's Galactic Empire, in both their standard version and AT-AHT upgrade, and as late as 34 ABY by the First Order in a modernized variant alongside the Titanic AT-M6. It's a truly iconic vehicle, doing everything from shooting a Force deity in the sky at the Battle of Atollon to serving as Rey's home as a rusted hulk in the deserts of Jakku. Now, they were of course not for private sale, but if you could get the right credentials and 150,000 credits, one of these devastating weapons of war could be yours. Just make sure you stock up on fuel pellets too. If an AT-AT existed in real life, it'd be about as tall as a semi-truck laid vertically, and as long as 2 school buses or 5 Volkswagen Beetles. They would tower over the Hollywood sign in Los Angeles, coming in at 1.5 times its height, while dwarfing everything else on the battlefront, being longer than 2 AATs or Rebel repulsor tanks, while being nearly as tall as 3 Hailfire droids or 2 of its predecessors, the AT-TE. If you didn't have a grapple hook, but you could clone Yoda, you'd have to balance 34 of them on top of each other to reach the top of the stooped cockpit. Although in the right art style, I'm sure he could topple one with the wave of his hand. Now for some cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The actual size of the AT-AT has been a source of drama in the Star Wars community for as long as The Empire Strikes Back has been out. Radio dramatizations, source books, West End RPG guides, and independent articles have given a range of heights from 33 feet to 55 feet. Curtis Saxton, Lord of Star Wars Visual Dictionaries, has given the most popularly accepted answer of 22.5 meters, carefully measuring Luke's height compared to the AT-AT he destroyed with the handy combination of lightsaber and concussion grenade. George Lucas's inspiration for the AT-ATs were the towering Martian tripods from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, while also specific design inspiration came from the giant maneuvering cranes that he would see in the port of Oakland, as well as a cancelled US Army prototype meant to be used in Vietnam. Just imagine that thing. And of course, there's tons of debate on how to pronounce it. You've heard me use both in this video, but I'm sure there'll be a war in the comments that'll make Palpatine proud over whether you say AT-AT or just AT-AT. Bring your best case argument down below. Its role in the battlefield is more akin to IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, which are designed to drop off a load of infantry and support them while they advance towards the enemy. Unlike IFVs, of course, they can destroy the heaviest armor that comes to face them, so it's a mix of a main battle tank and IFV rolled into one. It seems that in every Star Wars video game, role-playing game, and book, someone just has to hijack an AT-AT to complete their objective. From Cal Kestis seizing one to help Saw Gerrera's partisans on Kashyyyk, to escorting a captured rebel AT-AT in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Iden Versio captures one in the game's main campaign, and during the liberation of Kashyyyk, a Wookiee named Karatha one-ups Chewbacca's AT-ST hijack, commandeering an entire AT-AT mid-battle. Just remember, if you intend to board an AT-AT, wait for the 40 troopers to deploy, and then just take out the dorks in AR helmets. That's it for the breakdown. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Check out the links in the description, and most important of all, remember, the ground booming from the footsteps of an AT-AT means you do have some time to rethink your decision, but do it fast because they can shoot you from 10 miles away. And the Force will be with you. Always.
Holding position.
What's up, Meta Nerds? Today we'll be breaking down all the variants of the AT-AT Walker. Truly embodying its name, we'll see how the Empire made this lumbering war machine truly an all-terrain vehicle. Using all Legends and canon sources, we'll construct a full picture of this iconic Walker's variant spanning dozens of years in canon and more than a century in Legends. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you watch the dedicated AT-AT breakdown. You can click on this in the top right corner of the video, and it's also linked down in the description. But assuming you already know the effective base design, let's start with Legends, covering the 8 existing variants in this timeline before switching over the canon, and exploring the 4 additional variants that come out in the Disney era of Star Wars. And starting off with Legends, our first few are a bit simpler, straightforward designs. With Big Palpy ruling a truly galactic empire, Imperial forces could expect to fight on a myriad of different battlegrounds against rebel insurrectionists and later New Republic forces. Specialized for deployment on desert worlds, Kuat Drive Yards developed the Dune Walker. The Dune Walker was a minor variant with identical passengers, crew, and dimensions of the base AT-AT, with the major changes being the replacement of potential tertiary weapon systems with additional Sinar Z-23 heat dissipation units. These are essentially air conditioning units, and though the base unit had these installed, they increased the number of them in the Dune Walker and were specialized to better function in the scorching deserts of planets such as Tatooine. It's not hard to imagine the 40 embarked troopers and their crew in their heavy combat gear sweating enough to pass out in this giant cooking metal box of a walker. So while that might be a minor inclusion, it obviously was crucial. Now what you might have picked up on is that the AT-AT has no listed tertiary, no third weapon system, so it's unclear exactly what those heat dissipation units were replacing. On the other side of the spectrum, some of the walkers used by Blizzard Force were equipped with measures to better function in deep winter conditions. Nicknamed Snowwalkers, these winterized AT-ATs came with improved heat circulation systems to keep the crew and passengers warm, de-icing controls to ensure thick ice buildup did not interfere with the hydraulics, locomotion, visual, and weapon systems of the walker, as a lot of the really crucial tech, including the ground scanners, were located in the feet and could be under several meters of snow and ice. And so technically speaking, you've already seen these. It's just funny that the scenes that introduced this walker, we of course think of this as the standard AT-AT, and of course outwardly it all looks the same, but technically there's specialized systems making sure everything is kept nice and warm and functional. And let's use that to transition to some variants that don't have specific names, as many Imperial forces found ways to modify their walkers to fit the environment they were placed in. On planets without a breathable Type 1 atmosphere, AT-ATs could be outfitted with special gas filters, while additional heat recirculators could be added for worlds even colder than Hoth, or when operating in the vacuum of space. For planets with toxic rain or other extreme environments, anti-corrosive sheens would be applied to keep the walker's hydraulics, visuals, and electronics functional. So if you want to get even more technically specific here, almost every Imperial garrison modified their walkers in some way to make them best fit their local environment. Places with more hostile natives or animal and plant life were known to pack on dense durasteel hulls and extra plating, and some tried to mitigate the effects of radiation or chemical weapons. Looking to the first official combat variant, we have the Heavy AT-AT, featuring, well, heavier armor than its predecessor, but also stronger firepower, likely turbo laser grade as this was seen in some later Imperial walkers. And you might be thinking that the problem with this walker wasn't that it was weak, rebels weren't shooting through it, and its weaponry was more than adequate. And while that might make sense, it's definitely a very Imperial thing to do. Great for the war economy, promotional material, Empire Day celebrations, and to be a little fair, there were ever-increasing reports of rebels getting their hands on proton torpedoes and other explosives, and some had actually punctured the standard walker. So there is some practical aspect to this, even though it's probably mostly driven by the Tarkin doctrine. The next variant is the all-terrain ion cannon, which switched things up with a major redesign of the hull and weapon system. The majority of the troop's bay was removed to make room for an open mount ion cannon attached to the rear of this walker. Sacrificing the troop capacity of the AT-AT turned this vehicle from an armored transport to a self-propelled gun, with that ion cannon being its main armament. While not being a factory floor design, the Empire actually sent back some stock AT-ATs to have Kuat undergo this remodeling. This walker did retain all of its primary head-mounted weaponry, meaning the reactor would have to share power between the regular base weapons and the ion cannon, so probably not able to power both at full efficiency. ATICs were not used as offensive assault vehicles, but rather as mobile defensive platform weapons for key Imperial installations. The ATIC was noted to be very uncommon, not surprisingly, as base defense could already be provided by orbiting Imperial warships, dedicated, dug-in turbolasers and ion cannons, and even starfighter patrols and artillery. The cannon possessed a limited firing arc of around 115 degrees, and was clearly intended to engage aerial or space targets, being most effective against capital ships at range from Imperial stations. Like a supersized ion-firing J1. Because remember, like we see with the transition from Venator to Imperial Star Destroyers, the Empire had an increased focus on ion weaponry, not wanting to completely destroy the enemy, but disable and capture ships, letting the ISB torture out any info they could get, and hopefully understand the chain of custody to find out how these vehicles fell into rebel hands. And you see the Tarkin Doctrine really drove this next variant, taking the rule of fear literally with this one, the Shadow AT-AT. The Shadows were specifically designed separately from the main line, being 15.5 meters in height, about 7 meters shorter than the standard AT-AT, while still keeping the same proportions. And of course that seems small when comparing it to the ultimate behemoth, but it still towered above other combat vehicles, though it likely decreased the power of its weaponry as well. So why design the Shadow differently? The simple answer is intimidation. They were coated in gleaming black armor, purposely meant to strike fear into the enemy. Though funny enough, it had no specialization for stealth operations. There's no cloaking tech like we see in some ships or vehicles, but they were intended to be used during nighttime attacks or on gloomy, sunless worlds like Umbara. You might be thinking, really? It's just a glossy black paint job? But apparently many rebel soldiers said that this was one of the most frightening things they ever witnessed, as the Shadows themselves started opening fire on them, and struck even deeper in the rebel psyche than the already intimidating AT-ATs. What's interesting is that despite the smaller size, it could still carry 40 troops, so just packed in a bit tighter but also losing the speeder bikes. One of the most dramatic modifications to the AT-TE chassis originated from another local Imperial garrison's modification, and was so successful that it was officially adopted for factory production. The Aquatic Terrain Armored Transport, more commonly known as the AT-AT Swimmer, was a major modification that adapted the walker for underwater operations. Obviously, it's not a walker anymore, as its 4 armored legs were replaced at the hip joint with repulsor engines, effectively turning this thing into a submarine. The 5th engine at the rear drove the craft forward, while the bottom 4 possessed limited rotation to adjust the craft's position and provide additional speed when needed. The rear troop compartment was separated into 2 bays, connected by an additional flexible armor tube, much like we see connecting to the head or the midsection of the AT-TE. This one also retained its full trooper load of 40 personnel, who were assigned to the Imperial Maritime Division, which was a part of the Imperial Navy, but actually for water. 600 kilograms of cargo could be carried on board, while having a crew of 5, likely 2 pilots, a commander, and 2 crew chiefs to manage the infantry once they disembarked. The AT-AT Swimmer's pilots were specially trained for this task, drawn from the ranks of the Imperial Army. The head-mounted armament remained the same caliber, with the weapons themselves modified for operation in underwater conditions. Along with the rest of the vehicle, everything from sensor tech to air intake had to be changed. The armor and its construction was designed to protect not only against enemy fire, but the deleterious effects of saltwater corrosion, as well as the crushing pressure of deep ocean operations. The head provided a wider field of fire than its already impressive land-based counterpart's arc of 180 degrees, and protected the aft of the vehicle with a twin blaster turret that would end up being mounted on some later models. In battle, the Swimmer would deploy alongside sea troopers and TIE fighter boats for protection, engaging enemy targets and pressing through defenses to deploy their payload of infantry on crucial areas. This variant saw surprising success from its original modification by the Imperial garrison of the World Cup era to its official production as a joint venture between Kuat Drive Yards and the Hydrospear Corporation, and would be used by Darth Krayt's Galactic Empire as late as 137 ABY. By this time, the AT-AT Swimmer had undergone upgrades of its own, being outfitted with a dual blaster turret on the aft quarter to keep enemy infantry at bay, as well as a launch bay for Shark underwater fighters. The Swimmer acting as a mothership in its own right, as well as a command vessel favored by Imperial commanders and Sith Lords alike. The AT-AT lost none of its fearsome reputation as an aquatic vehicle. The swimmer may actually have the most fearsome reputation of any vehicle in Imperial history, participating in the genocide of the Mon Cala while being virtually impervious to enemy fire. The Final Legends variant also served Darth Krayt's Galactic Empire, as well as the Empire in Exile that opposed it, this being the All-Terrain Heavy Armored Transport, or AT-AHT. This was a major overhaul, with virtually every element of the walker changed in some fashion. The AHT presented a towering elephantine profile with a humpback troop compartment covered in overlapping armor plates and weapon stations. A modified insectoid command cabin featured 2 bug-eye vision ports on the diagonally sloped front part of the head, along with 2 twin cheek-mounted laser cannons partially protected by armored shutters. Below the chin, a single and very heavy laser cannon was mounted, roughly the size of the AT-TE's main gun. The humpback rear compartment rose to half the walker's height above the cabin, on which a dual heavy laser cannon sat one above each other on a vertical mount in a ball turret with limited rotation. Additionally, on each armored side of the AT-AHT, a single heavy laser cannon, again in a ball turret, covered the entire port and starboard sections of the walker from attack from enemy vehicles. Thus, this heavily armored walker possessed a minimum of 9 laser cannons, 5 of them being heavier than the standard AT-AT's main armament. There were no light blasters or laser cannons to deter infantry, which points to the Empire continuing their adherence to combined arms operations, in which the AT-AHTs would break the heaviest enemy resistance in vehicles. Infantry and speeders contemporary to this period would screen the walker's flanks, making sure no saboteurs could make their way in or hijack this thing, allowing the AHT to focus on its main objective. Since it doesn't have repulsor tech, it can walk right through shields and deliver the firepower of several tanks all at once, but still carrying those 60 troops, and still manage to pack in 8 speeder bikes, and perhaps most impressively, 3 entire AT-RCT, the riot control transports, a sort of upgraded and more deadly AT-RT or AT-PT. In this way, even without an escort, this walker could deploy enough troops and vehicles to form its entire own defensive screen if needed. It isn't clear if those RCTs were disassembled, like how some of the original AT-ATs could carry 2 disassembled AT-STs, but given its much greater size, I wouldn't be shocked if they were fully operational RCTs, sitting inside ready to be deployed via a boom system straight into battle. It could also carry up to 2 metric tons of cargo, and enough consumables for all the vehicles to last up to 1 week. The additional internal space likely accommodated a larger reactor to power the lumbering machine with its much heavier weight, and the only element not noticeably changed were the legs. The relatively smaller size of the locomotion system in comparison to the rest of the vehicle would make you think it had an even more sluggish gait, but it's actually noted to have an increased top speed, now hitting 80 kilometers per hour, or 50 miles per hour. By the time of the Second Galactic Civil War, the AHT had been relegated mostly to operations on worlds where conditions prohibited the use of repulsor vehicles, as other assault craft filled Krayt's Empire's needs for ground attacks. It is worth noting that regular AT-ATs continued to serve Krayt's Empire in an updated form. In fact, since the Battle of Endor, some AT-ATs were upgraded with dual turbo lasers in place of the dual heavy laser cannons as primary armament. So it's safe to say that these late AT-AT models carried at least dual turbo lasers. So despite all the flaws pointed out in Rebel propaganda, and that greatest of enemy, gravity, it was clearly an effective design that was able to prove its worth as late as 137 years after the Battle of Yavin. But now let's look at the cannon variants. The first variant we see is fairly minor, a straightforward upgrade to the walker, being the Elite AT-AT, combining the dark armor of the Shadow with the heavier firepower and thicker armor of the Heavy AT-AT. Its laser cannons were upgraded, which must mean that they became turbolaser grade. And Imperial commanders took the threat of tow cable attacks like those seen on Hoth very seriously. So seriously that the Elite AT-AT came with inbuilt saws right inside the legs that would sever cables to avoid tripping from such attacks. As you might guess, only the best of the best AT-AT pilots would become those entrusted to pilot the Elite. And remember, all AT-AT pilots were already known to be drawn from a pool of the cream of the crop of Imperial assault drivers, seen as the most arrogant pilots in the entire military. So just imagine how insufferable these elite pilots would be. But curiously, this walker has a very notable weakness, being uniquely susceptible to heavy ion explosives. So perhaps that's a flaw of the certain alloy used in the upgraded armor, being better at diffusing kinetic attacks, diffusing the heat of most lasers, but amplifying the effects of ion weaponry. We can guess that it had a troop capacity of around 40 and would have cost a lot more than the standard 150,000 credits. Next up is a specialized engineering variant, the All-Terrain Armored Cargo Transport, not to be confused with the All-Terrain Construction Transport. Neither of these AT-ACTs was intended to partake in direct combat, but was specialized for construction and engineering, standing considerably taller than the AT-AT at a height of almost 32 meters and a top speed of 50 kilometers per hour, or 31 miles per hour, and was classified as an armored cargo walker. The most notable change was the swapping of the two-tiered troop bay for an open modular cargo hold. This cargo hold was capable of accepting either a dedicated Imperial cargo container or vast numbers of crates, odd containers, and raw materials within its 550 cubic meters of internal space. Even when completely filled, 10 passengers could be carried on board as well. Stevedore or dock droids could be employed, along with Imperial quartermasters who would load these transports with supplies, particularly the ultra-dense materials which the ACT could carry with ease that might overwhelm most repulsor trucks. An electromagnetic tensor field reinforced the legs, especially the knee joints, to enable the AT-ACT to carry greater loads with greater stability. The Walker was staffed by a reduced crew of just a single pilot, typically drawn from any Imperial Armored Branch's service. They were typically deployed on garrison, manufacturing, or mining worlds, where these capabilities could be used to great effect, whether it be shuttling components for Imperial Star Destroyers, or minerals to be turned into armor plating and war material. They were used by the Imperial Corps of Engineers whenever military construction was required, from Darth Vader's castle on Mustafar to the Scarif complex. While not intended for frontline combat, the vehicle was more than capable of defending itself against light threats and providing fire support to Imperial forces, whether it be against hostile wildlife or rebel incursions. Its legs, especially the knees, were always a weakness and vulnerable to even E-Web grade fire, although the vehicle as a whole retained the tough, durable reputation of the AT-AT line, shrugging off a direct hit from a rocket launcher on Scarif. The Walker's chin-mounted MS-2 heavy laser cannons were shifted to the command cabin's cheeks and the medium laser cannons removed entirely, lightening the overall armament. As an engineering vehicle, the Walker was not intended for combat, but could be that first response or last-ditch reserve to augment existing Imperial armored forces if they were facing a powerful threat. And these you could actually get a bit cheaper at 125,000 credits. Just as Darth Krayt's Empire deployed variants far into Legends, the First Order utilized up-armored and sleeker AT-ATs. The FO AT-AT, manufactured by Kuat's successor company, Kuat and Trala, saw service in the Battle of Krayt and beyond, providing First Order forces with a familiar ground assault vehicle. This vehicle was up-armored, created with the next-generation lightweight materials layered across the hull, offering better protection at no increased weight. But notably, its armament was reduced to just the cheek-mounted laser cannons, dropping the iconic heavy chin laser cannons, which might actually be the worst thing we saw at Krayt. While less powerful overall, these weapons were improved, being more accurate due to better targeting systems, on top of benefiting from a faster fire rate. Despite its size and power, the role of the mainline assault vehicle was replaced by the AT-M6, which I'll talk about next, but one other minor alteration I wanted to mention, placing of the frontal toe flap with this solid block meant to crush through obstacles as well as an improved shin armor to further protect against catastrophic leg hits. A cockpit ramp below the command module in place of the heavy laser cannons offers easier accessibility, but also a potential weak point in the formidable armor plating, though it would be going into battle screened by updated AT-STs, just like their predecessors decades before. And now we arrive at the all-terrain Mega Caliber 6. The M6 differs considerably in weaponry, complement, internal arrangement, and doctrinal role than all other AT-ATs, significantly departing from the traditional troop transport role into a dedicated siege platform. Towering over the competition with a height of more than 36 meters, about 1.5 times the standard, it brings incredible firepower to any battlefront. At 40 meters long, it's about twice the length of the standard, while being an impressive 18 meters wide. The main armament of the vehicle is also its namesake, the Mega Caliber 6 turbo laser cannon. Mounted in an elephantine hump along where the troop bays would usually be positioned, the barrel of the M6 protruded from an armor housing with its internal structure running deep into the Walker. The cannon, being a Starship-grade turbolaser, is capable of engaging shielded positions rated to deflect the attention of capital ships. Despite being mounted in a mobile ground vehicle, the cannon retains a moderate fire rate, outputting considerable destructive power. With accurate fire, the Mega Caliber 6 is more than able to destroy virtually any ground vehicle with a single on-target round. It can devastate even the densest defensive lines in most protected fortresses and fortified cities. A weapons room positioned on the gun deck serves this weapon, more reminiscent of a firing center on a capital ship. which is powered by a dedicated power plant directly above the weapon's room. Heavy-duty heat exhaust and shock absorbers help the M6 deal with the destructive blowback of such a powerful weapon. The AT-M6 is further armed with a pair of medium anti-ship laser cannons on the cheeks of the heavily armored command cabin, these typically being the lightest armament capital ships would bring to bear on each other in ship-to-ship duels, and more than capable of devastating any medium or heavy ground vehicle with a single salvo. This already obscene firepower is greatly strengthened by a pair of chin-mounted heavy laser cannons positioned between the angular jowls of the command module, which themselves are studded with horizontally racked targeting sensors. By its armament alone, the M6 does away with any pretense for any dedicated anti-infantry firepower, instead is solely dedicated to the destruction of highly fortified installations in enemy armored divisions. This extreme firepower, combined with the power demands for such a gargantuan and mighty vehicle, and all this required an upgraded power system. Rather than relying on a bay of fuel cells, it utilizes a large fusion reactor embedded deep within the behemoth's lower rear section, kept in continuous operation to generate sufficient power for the weapons and locomotion. The dual hemisphere reactor, measuring at least 8 meters in diameter, is kept in operation by a supply of reactant fuel, with an outer shell masking an internal reactor coil and the extremely harmful energies emitted by its operation. A chain of 4 turbolaser gas canisters run down the AT-M6's sloped back, providing the ammunition for the main weapon, but also a potential target for enemy forces able to get around the vehicle's rear quarter. The Mega Caliber 6 cannon and the reactor take up the majority of the internal space, with enough room left for an auxiliary compartment capable of being swapped out with a number of mission modules depending on the walker's deployment. For the Battle of Crate, this compartment was utilized as an auxiliary troop bay, carrying 12 passengers into battle. It's possible this compartment could also be used as a dedicated command and control center for ground forces, or as an engineering space, maybe even a communications node during operations. Now, of course, bringing 12 troops into battle was hardly significant next to those carried on the smaller First Order AT-AT, or what could be deployed through assault landers and armed shuttles, and it is incapable of deploying its troops through an assault drop through the belly, which is the ultimate sign of a departure from the troop transport role. Maybe all those guys on board are just meant to make sure it isn't captured. Its rear legs are mostly the same, but the front pair are considerably modified. It bears massive armored forelegs terminating in mech carpal foot structures similar to a simian. These redesigned frontal legs bear more of the AT-M6's considerable weight, but also are meant to brace the walker during the firing of the Mega Caliber 6 main cannon, ensuring it is a stable firing platform. A complicated system of heavy hydraulic pistons and overlapping gears that all drive the forelegs require their own ventilation gates, which were cleverly designed to work as cable cutters, severing any slim chance of these behemoths being taken down in the fashion of its predecessors. The entire vehicle is clad in hyper-advanced armor, developed in secret foundries in the unknown regions, even denser and tougher than those of the AT-ATs. But like the standard, the command cabin is equipped with a system of sensor screens, providing the pair of pilots with up-to-date targeting, tactical, and terrain data, all from the onboard sensors from the JAL rangefinders to the footpad terrain sensors. A vehicle commander stands behind and above the pilots, typically with his own command dais, in the typically domineering first-order fashion. In summary, the AT-M6 amps up the psychological terror and overwhelming firepower classic to the AT-AT line, providing First-Order officers a nearly unstoppable siege engine to finally snuff out any sparks of the New Republic. My question to you is, of all those variants, which is your favorite, and if you had to choose between the AT-M6 and AT-AHT, which of these supersized armored titans would you prefer to use on the battlefield? And could one of them defeat the other in a 1v1 match? Let me know in the comments down below. Now for a couple cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, the AT-M6 would be roughly equal in height to the massive redwood trees in California, the tallest trees on the planet, or a whopping 1/5 the height of the Space Needle in Toronto. Lengthwise, it's as long as 2 bowling lanes laid end to end, or longer than 12 74Z speeder bikes. Now, like some of the wonkiest vehicles in Star Wars, the Shadow and AT-IC were developed originally just as toys. The AT-IC in particular being discontinued by Kenner after being kit bashed together, but still happily making it into the Legends continuity as a very rare variant. I haven't seen if there's any mods for Empire at War or similar strategy games that have the giant AT-AHT or M6, but if you know of one, definitely comment down below. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment your thoughts and suggestions, but most important of all, remember, I hope General Veers is getting royalty checks from all these variants, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, meta nerds? Today we're going to be taking a look at a criminally underexplored vehicle within both Star Wars Legends and canon, the Republic's UT-AT. We'll go over what little history we have, the specifications of this strange tank, and take a look behind the scenes to see what kind of details may be hidden in the archives. Let's crack open our holocrons and explore the reason this vehicle came to be. The Unstable Terrain Artillery Transport, also called the Trident, was a vehicle born of necessity. It was a collaboration between two companies that allowed this vehicle to glide into the battlefront in the midst of the Clone Wars. Our old friends at the famous Kuat Drive Yards decided to work in tandem with the engineers of the also obscure High Altitude Entry Transport 221, the fine engineers over at Mikun Corporations. Mikun was known more so for its work with repulsor technology, and with Kuat coming to the realization that its all-terrain line of combat vehicles wasn't quite living up to its name, it was time to work in a new design. One that would incorporate many of the classic Kuat features, but also integrate a series of repulsor lift skis to enable this thing to safely cross precarious terrain, like the bridges of Megiddo and Agamar. It was the disastrous Battle of Agamar, in fact, that allowed the UT-AT to get up and running. As the Republic launched its attack on the world, known as the Mirgoshir Campaign, they found that the usually dependable ATTE was a poor choice, given this world was abundant with natural land bridges. These heavy, plodding walkers stomped onto these paths with such force that it often led these bridges to give way and collapse under the weight, resulting in a devastating loss of both equipment and, more crucially, the clones' lives. A Pyrrhic victory if there ever was one. And so with a lesson learned, the UT-AT hovered off that assembly line and was pressed into combat. Mainly seeing its action towards the end of the Clone Wars, the UT-AT was heavily used during Ki-Adi-Mundi's siege of Megiddo, a key separatist world in the Outer Rim. We can see several of these craft being used to go gun-to-gun with the massive Octoptara, with the droid armies bombarding the front line. While we do see one damaged by a well-placed rocket, similar to the Hailfire downing the ATTE at the very beginning of the war on Geonosis, it's safe to assume these floating battle barges were getting results, as we do see Mundi and Bakara pushing forward against the droid army. We also know that these highly specialized death sleds were being put to work on the bridge-heavy world of Cato Neimoidia, perhaps being led by Plo's Bros and the Wolfpack before Order 66 went down. Aside from the wreckage of this vehicle being seen on scrap worlds after the rise of the Empire, that is all of the history the UT-AT has written so far, as we barely see it in either canon or legends, despite it supposedly being introduced in 22 BBY. That either goes to show just how incredibly specific the circumstances needed to be for the Trident to be seen in battle, or out of universe, the producers of the Clone Wars didn't see much need to incorporate such an obscure vehicle into the Republic's army. Like the AT-AP, it's another shame. So since that's it for its short history, let's break down the specs of this thing. It actually has quite a bit of interesting features, unique to its role within the Grand Army. With a length of 23.8 meters, or just a bit over 78 feet, the UT-AT was actually longer than its cousin, the ATTE, and about 13 Minox long. And if it came floating into combat on our Earth battlefields, it would be comparable to the size of 2.5 M1 Abrams tanks. We don't actually have a height measurement, shockingly, but just from what we see in the movies and from pictures, it's safe to say that it was around an ATTE, not including the legs, and so much taller than the Senate. Maintaining the mystery of this strange behemoth is its cost, as we also never do find out how many credits this baby would cost the Republic. What we do have is its speed. Clocking in at 45 kilometers per hour, or just under 28 miles per hour, it's safe to say that the UT-AT wasn't blazing into battle, but that, however, wasn't its purpose, as you'll see when we look at these prongs that gave the Trident its name. These being the three massive forward-facing cannons. The main cannon of the UT-AT was an artillery turbo laser, perfect for taking on massive droid walkers or thinning out swarms of CIS infantry. Flanking this great gun are two medium laser cannons, and while they may not look as deadly as the main turret, they certainly shouldn't be underestimated. These cannons could easily overpower opposing tanks, such as the AAT. And speaking of the armored assault tank, the configuration of the Trident's cannons do bear a striking resemblance to the droid's tank, and I'd wager some inspiration was taken on Kuat's part.
Is that legal?
I will make it legal.
If they weren't liquidated, I'm sure Bactoid might have been suing Kuat. But it doesn't end there for the UT-AT, as once again it shares a feature with its quadrupedal cousin, but this time doubles it, having 4 anti-infantry guns to guard the rear. The UT-AT was more than capable of surviving a flank attack from some daring droids. Despite having 6 cannons, it only needed 5 gunners, with the single pilot manning the final turret. Its cockpit also shares a design with the ATTE, although slightly more angled. and all this firepower made it a more mobile and self-sufficient artillery option for the GAR, unlike the exposed and vulnerable AV-7 cannon, though still blocked from going through shields unlike the AT-AP. As the war trudged on and battles waged for months, these vehicles would be forced into frontline combat like we see on Megiddo before Master Mundi meets his end. Exposed, close to the enemy, and completely undefended from the powerful Tri-Droids. And while it's impressive, the UTAT wasn't perfect by any means. Its repulsor skis made it easier to glide over impossible terrain, but did open up a crucial weak point. If a rocket or mine was able to get underneath this beast and do damage to the 16 skis, well... And taking a closer look at those skis, we can see that they are in 2 rows on the belly of the tank, totally cancelling out its weight and allowing it to glide, made up of a series of repulsors. Which, interesting side note, there's actually anti-repulsor technology in the ATTE's feet. Instead of repelling gravity, it allows it to sort of stick to any surface. These 16 repulsing skis were very useful not only on unstable bridges, but also on snow or even water. These were low-power repulsor lifts though, thus explaining its quite sad max speed. And this also made maneuvering the tank a tedious process. One can only imagine how miserable this thing would be to parallel park. And luckily the skis were blaster-proof, so no sneaky commando droid could take down a UTAT with measly blaster rifle fire. It is a proper tank and you had to use explosives, being equipped with heavy armor, bridge deploying materials for creating its own path, and even bomblet generators. This tech allowed this monster to unleash a hail of ion-charged misery against all opposing clankers, instantly rendering them inert. Not bad if the Seps ever get too close, and you don't even have to worry about hurting your own men. Just some high-pitched ringing in their comms. Scanning equipment was stored below the cockpit, and although this vehicle was not a designated troop carrier by design, it could haul 20 clone troopers into battle, along with a whopping 26 tons of cargo, which could include Jabba and 16 of his closest family members. So that's it for the breakdown. Hopefully we can help this thing be a little less obscure. Let's look at some cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The UTAT made its debut in Revenge of the Sith back in 2005 during the infamous Order 66 scene. Aside from that lone appearance, it was only seen as scrap in some versions of The Force Unleashed, not even every version, and is mentioned in the Tarkin novel. It is apparently seen in cutscenes from 2005's Battlefront 2, but I couldn't find it. Let me know if you guys did. Almost all of the information on the UTAT comes from an old StarWars.com feature, What's the Story? In this feature, Billy Bueller and the Dark Moose supply us with the specs and name. Moose even suggests a different name, opting for the ATCS or All-Terrain Combat Sled, but this never caught on. The information these two provided ended up in the Visual Dictionary and Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, etching Billy and Moose into Star Wars history. Unlike almost everything that has ever existed in the history of Star Wars, the UTAT has no representation in the merchandise lineup.
The rights for all the merchandising, all the action figures, all the toys. And then when that movie exploded, the toy sales, well, that's where the money really was.
No Hasbro toys, no Legos, no sick t-shirts, nothing outside of its place on trading cards and of course the Visual Dictionary. But the mighty Trident didn't even get a spot in the iconic cross-sections books. To make sure you understand this point, Star Wars has made toys on characters and vehicles not even seen on screen. I'm looking at you, Constable Zuvio, and your supposed 7 seconds of screen time. So the UTAT's omission is somewhat surprising. The UT-AT never appeared in the Clone Wars, making it, along with the AT-AP, as some of the few iconic Republic vehicles that don't make the jump to animation. So that closes the holo file on the UT-AT. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, share, and subscribe. That's all the best way to help me out. Check out one of these videos if you want to see more, but most important of all, remember, if you want to go sledding in the galaxy far, far away, make sure you take this war toboggan, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, meta nerds? Let's break down the All-Terrain Open Transport, or AT-OT. And we'll start with its main role. It might seem odd to have an open top in a war where an enemy was pumping out swarms of cheap and effective droid fighters like the Vulture and Hyena. They could just strafe these tightly packed in clones, or drop a single bomb on them. But just looking at the context we first see them in does help us understand it more. They have the most heavily armed and armored unit at the very front, the ATTE. In that vehicle's breakdown, we saw how effective the main cannon could be at long range, and the suite of terrain sensors to assess the threats on the battlefront. It was accurate enough to shoot down nimble starfighters, and even incoming rockets. And at the rear of this column we see a pair of AT-APs. The all-terrain attack pod had lighter armor, didn't serve that dual role as a troop transport like the TE, but was a great mix of that tank and artillery like the AV-7. having this enormous heavy blaster cannon that makes the mass driver look small in comparison, even though it's the exact same one used on the ATTE. Since that mass driver cannon had a variable munitions launcher, it could fire everything from bunker busters to armor-piercing rounds, generate bolts to take down battle droids, or shoot down starfighters. And although not explicitly stated, I don't see why it couldn't also fire flak and work like an anti-aircraft gun, like we saw with the Geonosians during the second Battle of Geonosis. And if you look in between the walkers, there are two pairs of ISPs. The infantry support platform was a rapid response hovercraft, with two twin blaster cannons that would race out to the sides to flank any enemies they encountered, or break through the ambush and circle back to pincer these attackers. So it wasn't like the open transports were leading the charge against fortress walls, waiting for hot droid oil to be poured on them. And they even had the boys on slugback keeping a lookout as well. One design improvement over the Tactical Enforcer is that it no longer has a weak, flexible midsection. It does have this smaller, more AT-AT-like weak neck connection, but even then, because of the way this armored section extends over it, you still get full range of motion without the threat from being shot down from above. With aircraft being your greatest threat, this would force the enemy to take a lower angle of attack, trying to shoot at it from the sides. And when possible, a smart walker pilot could make that angle of attack impossible by using terrain like buildings, canyons, or vegetation to make sure the starfighter couldn't get a low side angle. There were 3 major battles of Felucia, with this sector being one of the hottest conflict zones of the war. Neither Republic nor Separatist general felt that they ever had complete control of this jungle world, with the fate of a battle being changed by the arrival of a C-9979 or Acclimator descending through the hot and humid atmosphere. And so these walkers would be crucial in making sure that any area that was captured by the Republic would be securely supplied and defended from there on out. The AT-OT itself stood 5.8 meters tall and had a length of 14.3 meters, making it a child Jawa shorter than the AT-TE and about an Ewok longer, while actually being a bit slower at 55 kilometers per hour or 34 miles per hour, and likely had a similar 500-mile range on its fuel tank. Most of the walker line used the same parts, so everything from the sensors inside to the legs themselves are the same. And though slightly different, the same goes for the cockpit canopy design and function. The forward weaponry is a pair of medium laser cannons, while the rear 2 are anti-personnel cannons, in the same style as the AT-TE. And we can imagine the inside look pretty similar as well, with a gunner operating each of these guns in a large open troop section, but not split into 2 sections. Kuat Drive Yards state that there are 34 seats for troops up top, and I'd guess likely around 20 to 30 troops inside, though officially there is no internal troop capacity ever mentioned, and so it may have just been dedicated to supplies, heavy weaponry like turrets, and small vehicles like speeder bikes and frogwalkers. If there are no troops inside, this could point to another theory I have on why we see this open-top design pop up towards the end of the war. If we're keeping it real with Kuat, their armor wasn't cutting it. All the walkers were impervious to things like blaster fire and grenades, and while it's true that an AT-OT trooper would be worried if they did walk into an ambush, all that small arms fire would be focused on them. But if a separatist bomb or missile hit you, you were dead either way, no matter which armored walker you were in. You can have a nice Durasteel coffin in your AT-TE, or be scattered out the top like clone confetti, but the survival rate was the same. Toward the end of the war, debates were raging in the Senate over how they were going to keep paying for everything, getting so bad that it threatened to foil Palpatine's plans and bring peace.
The Republic is near bankruptcy due to the cost of this war.
Won't this bill essentially deregulate the banks? A small price to pay to finance the war, is it not?
So the AT-OT was a cheaper option and could move about 3 times the troops of the AT-TE. Since they would be used alongside other assets, this was a cheap force multiplier that effectively wasn't any weaker against things like Hailfire droids and hyenas, because dead is dead, they weren't more dead. And in fact, it might have been even safer since they could bail out of the top. Even standing at its highest, it would only be about a 2-story jump. Not the most comfortable, but these clones were elite, and they wouldn't have thought twice about it. And that's jumping off from here. But towards the rear, you see the ramp that cut this height in half, to around 10 feet, which was designed to be used when it sat down to deploy them like we see with the AT-TE. And the fact that this is down while they are moving, not expecting to take contact, before they even saw the enemy, shows how the clones and Republic command adapted to the war. It didn't hurt to just leave it down, so just have it down all the time, and I could see the training around this being that at the first sign of enemy armor or aircraft, the troops could bail over the top or slide down this ramp, hit the ground running, and spread out to secure the perimeter, and make sure no enemy infantry closed in on the armored units. The height of the walls in this section is perfect to completely protect them from the sides when seated, and even when standing, only their armored heads, about from the eyes up, would be exposed, allowing them to keep a lookout as they walk through the terrain, be that a dense jungle or occupied city. Another interesting use is that since the legs are the same as the AT-TE, it could scale almost any terrain, even 90-degree sheer cliff walls, due to the footpads having both magnetic clamps, but more importantly tractor beam tech that's usually only seen in ships. which warped gravity to create this pull, locking the foot onto whatever it was climbing over, allowing the AT-OT to shuttle supplies and troops to remote outposts or zones that were first established by LAATs. Letting the gunships clear everything out, drop some forward command stations and maybe a tank or two, and have the OTs come through to secure these positions. The mission we see them on in the final moments of the war resulted from the Outer Rim sieges, the CIS effort to overwhelm areas in the Outer Rim to draw the Republic out of the core, setting up the attack on Coruscant. The 327th Star Corps Infantry, under the command of Jedi General Aayla Secura, would try to capture Shu Mai, the president of the Commerce Guild. But to divert the Republic forces, the Separatist leaders set off a series of explosions that essentially held the planet hostage. Toxins were leaking into the planet-wide aquifer on Felucia, and if the Republic didn't act quickly, this would poison all life on this lush world within just 4 days. The armored column was led by General Secura, and she had just discovered enemy armor near the water treatment facility. Just as Order 66 was being broadcast, a Felucia bird, possibly a variant of a Pico Pico, gets startled and screeches past Aayla, distracting her for just a moment as their clones open fire. Partly due to her leadership style, but also just because they'd seen how unstoppable Jedi could be, they make extra sure that she is dead. In the Imperial era, like most of the CIS and Republic ships and vehicles, the AT-OTs would be scrapped on planet-wide facilities like Bracca. While some AT-TEs and Juggernauts live on a bit longer, they ultimately met the same fate, with stormtroopers and cargo being moved around with things like the Imperial Troop Transport and AT-AT. There was no longer the need for as many walkers, since their main advantage was that they could walk through energy shields, just like we see with infantry, and not be repulsed away like the hovercraft using repulsor tech to get off the ground. Since the AT-OT wasn't meant to lead from the front, though using a repulsor craft would have been quicker to shuttle things about, it also meant that you couldn't walk through your own shields. Clones would put up portable base shield generators and be confident that enemy AATs or C9979s could not get through, since they both rely heavily on repulsor tech. But in order for this strategy to work, your resupply vehicles also had to be walkers, even if that meant they were a bit slower. But when this wasn't a concern, you did have the RTT, the Republic Troop Transport, which was like a powerful speeder, a land-based LAAT, and would be the inspiration for the ITT, since the enemy was now your own citizens, not a massive, fully funded military with repulsor tanks and their own energy shields. But on the rare occasion when the enemy did get their hands on a shield, the Empire could send in their AT-AT, DP, and ST. So that's it for the breakdown. I hope it explains why the AT-OT definitely had a role in the Republic Army. And as for behind the scenes facts, like most of the Star Wars ships and vehicles, it was intended to evoke things from World War I and II, which is why you have stuff like charging tactics, exposed gunners, manually firing cannons, and other tech that seems out of place on a sci-fi battlefront. And so this was meant to be reminiscent of open-top troop carriers, everything from trucks to half-tracks. Now they only appear in Revenge of the Sith, and it is a bit of a forgotten vehicle, only appearing in the 2014 mobile game Galactic Defense. Not even in Empire at War or the Battlefront games. And there is no cross-section for it, but the other ones used come from the Complete Cross-Sections book, and there are some details in the Complete Visual Dictionary. If you like this video, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Leave a comment on this or suggestions for future videos, share it, and check out the membership. But most important of all, remember, when you hear a hyena, tuck and roll, because broken ankles bog down campaigns, and the Force will be with you. Always.
I want lightning up here now!
Here comes the cavalry. What's up, meta nerds? Today we're going to be taking a detailed look at the Republic's all-terrain recon transport, aka the AT-RT. We'll be pulling from both Legends and Canon to see how these versatile walkers were used to great effect by the Clone Army. Continued to see deployment into the Imperial era and even beyond. The All-Terrain Reconnaissance Transport, Republic Scout Walker, or All-Terrain Recon Transport, known simply as the AT-RT, was the bipedal walker striding off the assembly line at Kuat Drive Yards, the main source of all the Republic's ground vehicles. Part of their lauded all-terrain line, the AT-RT is a single-man vehicle that cost anywhere between 8,000 and 20,000 credits, and stood a mere 3.4 meters in height. At only 1.5 Wookiees tall, it was one of the smallest walkers to ever stomp off a Kuat. But as a wise Muppet once said,
"Size matters not."
Because although it's not as imposing as the AT-TE or even the AT-AP, what it lacks in intimidation, it more than makes up for in speed and maneuverability. Able to reach top speeds of 75 kilometers per hour, or roughly 46 miles per hour, this thing can not just walk like its bigger brothers, but full-on sprint into combat, leaping over explosions, tough terrain, and even evading blaster bolts being fired from across the battlefront. Often deployed in packs, it's rare to see less than 4 per squad, and for major engagements, dozens could be bounding across the war-torn front to attack the enemy, like what we see on Umbara. This comparably small frame comes with more deployment options as well, with a single rider able to be dropped by an LAAT gunship without requiring a landing, and you can even march a pair of walkers across the battlefront in safety by packing them into the ATTE until you felt safe enough to use these swift little recon walkers, unfolding similar to the B1 out of an MTT, and jumping into combat like what we see on Ryloth. It's not all positives, however, with no shielding. You just get the metal armor plating protecting the pilot's lower half, the thin legs, a single but heavy repeating blaster cannon, and a very exposed driver, all meant the ATRT couldn't be used by any shiny fresh off a Camino. So enter the Advanced Recon Force Trooper.
Did the kidnappers see you?
No, sir. We're the best scouts in the regiment.
Better known as the ARF Trooper, these clones were trained to make the best use out of these machines, minimizing its notable flaws by making use of numbers and speed, almost always with deadly results. Let's take a look at the tactics used during the liberation of Ryloth, and what made the boys in Lightning Squad so effective. Descending from an ATTE by order of Jedi General Mace Windu, at least 5 scout walkers came barreling to the rescue after the droid army pinned down the clones' heavy walkers on this narrow path. Led by Windu and Commander Pons, the scout walkers used their incredible agility to close the gap between themselves and the enemy's several AATs in a remarkably quick time, dodging bolts and leaping clear over explosions. All the training the ARFs received on those augmented reality battlefronts in the bowels of Camino really paid off when a trooper was able to throw a thermal detonator right below the main barrel of the Separatist tank. After thinning the herd, the rest of the squads surrounding the remaining tanks were incredibly precise in their aim, targeting the tank's weakness and blasting them to scrap. We also see how accurate the main gun of the walker is, with Mace able to decapitate the droid commander. Although designed to take on infantry, the main gun of the ATRT was an extreme threat to larger vehicles when multiple walkers could focus their fire. We see this strategy used again on Umbara to a similar effect, with dozens of speedy walkers being dropped into the battlefront amidst a rain of heavy artillery fire. Weaving through the bright green bolts on this darkened hellscape of a planet, the ARFs of Anakin's 501st found success getting to the Umbaran machines, once again overwhelming them with a barrage of cannon fire. These light walkers were also perfect for urban missions, as seen during the Battle of Kyros, with the 501st galloping into battle atop their walkers, blasting droids through the more settled villages once inhabited by the Togruta. Backing up the even faster BARC speeder bikes, the recon walkers made short work of the droids along the way. The walkers were then used by Anakin and Ahsoka to quickly survey the surrounding area for bombs planted by slaver Darth Stanar, and it's in this search that we get a good look at the sensor system on the main viewing screen of the walker's console. This is a scout vehicle, first and foremost after all, so a state-of-the-art sensor system was a must. Thanks to the sprinting capability of these walkers, Anakin and Ahsoka were able to stop any more damage from being done by the Zygerian scum. Racing back to assist Obi-Wan, we get a great example of all the power in those legs. Anakin and his Padawan launched themselves into the air atop their walkers to get close to the escaping ship. This burst gave them enough distance to be able to summon the Force and finish off this maneuver and land on Dinar's ship, leading to some aggressive negotiations.
Where are they?
It should be noted how some squads customized their rides similar to their armor, with the 501st painting their mounts blue, bearing the name of their legion, and with Razor and Stack of Lightning Squadron painting theirs with Arabish letters B, E, and A. Despite all my digging, I couldn't find any specific meaning. We'll just have to email Filoni to get to the bottom of this. As the war raged on into its final months, we see the ARF Trooper replaced by the less creatively named ATRT Driver. It isn't made clear if these troops are a completely different branch of the GAR or simply the next evolution of the ARF, and this could be hinted at the design of Hound, an ARF Trooper Sergeant stationed on Coruscant, whose helmet bears more of a similar style to that of the ATRT Driver, but that's purely speculation. These scout walkers were present on Kashyyyk when Order 66 came down, and despite the ordeal giving Commander Greed quite a headache, his men were seen using now Imperial ATRTs to hunt down Yoda, and would be immediately turned to enforce obedience from the Wookiee people, using the nimble walkers to quickly spread through the jungles and Wookiee cities, the first moves of what would turn this entire planet into a slave camp. Shown with their bright searchlight, and we even see how it works as a weapon rack for the driver's rifles, this squad came across a downed Wookiee flyer, immediately spreading out to pursue and capture any survivors. Even though the Empire was known to dismantle and quickly replace the Republic's war machines, it did hang on to the ATRT. Legends has it that a few of these walkers were used during Operation Nightfall, with some even being left behind to guard the ravaged temple in case of any Jedi return. The clones of Lightning Squad, now Stormtroopers, were also allowed to continue use of their walkers. Many were even used as policing vehicles, at least according to former Imperial, now Rebel, and totally not with a fake beard, Crix Madine. Eventually, the Empire did phase this nimble vehicle out of the frontline combat role, in favor of the ATDP and ATST. I suppose the smaller ATRT didn't quite fit into the Tarkin doctrine. Not scary and far too cheap and practical. Like with most vehicles, the Rebel Alliance is also said to have gotten their hands on a few, making some modifications to the weaponry, deciding to forego the repeating blaster for either a flamethrower or a Z6 rotary cannon, like the kind used by Heavy. These walkers proved popular, as some were even being used as late as 34 ABY by the First Order on Planet Vordan, which makes these little guys one of the longest living walkers in the galaxy. That covers the history of the ATRT, but let's dive into some behind the scenes facts. The ATRT was designed by concept artist TK Frame for Revenge of the Sith, but it first appeared in Clone Wars, the 2003 Cartoon Network show by Genndy Tartakovsky, specifically in Chapter 22. After Anakin and Obi-Wan lower the shields surrounding the Separatist compound, Commander Cody sends in dozens of ATRTs to provide backup to his infantry and air support. It's always interesting to see how many characters and vehicles so synonymous with Revenge of the Sith appeared first in this Clone Wars show. As the lead-in meant to hype the movie, it felt like a VIP sneak peek for us that saw it live. The ATRT appears in several video games, with perhaps its most notable appearance in both the classic and rebooted Battlefront 2, with it supporting a grenade launcher in the classic, though it was much slower than depicted now. It also appears in The Force Unleashed, but only the Nintendo DS version. According to the script for Revenge of the Sith, the ATRT was supposed to play a more significant role. Yoda would distract a group of now villainous clones, only for Chewie to pull the pilot from its saddle and take command of the walker, in a callback to Return of the Jedi. I'm always down for more Revenge of the Sith, but I think it's not a bad omission. The Tarzan scream from the Battle of Kashyyyk works better as a far more subtle homage to Chewbacca's AT-ST takeover. ATRT also has been a popular toy for both Hasbro and LEGO to produce over these years, with 10 separate models by LEGO since 2005, and Hasbro joining in on many releases in both the Clone Wars figure line and of course the basic figure line for Revenge of the Sith. The first release of the Recon Walker was even motorized, though maybe not hitting those 46-mile-an-hour top speeds. Even Hot Toys is getting in on the fun with the 501st variant of the Walker and ARF Trooper heading to market. Despite its limited screen time, the ATRT is proving to have a lasting impact on the Star Wars fandom. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, share the video with someone who might like it, and subscribe to see more. But most important of all, remember, never look a gift walker in the cannon, and the Force will be with you, always.
Units, over here!
What's up, Meta Nerds? This time we're going to be taking a look into another specialized member of Kuat's all-terrain lineup, the All-Terrain Pod Walker. We'll go over its purpose, its use by the GAR, and how the maker himself brought this walker to life. But first, let's lift the metaphorical hood and see what made the AT-AP so unique. Standing at an impressive 11 meters or roughly 36 feet, the AT-AP would tower over the AT-TE, being over double its height and just under 6 Dexter Jetsters. In our world, this walker would be about the height of 2 male giraffes, and surely just as graceful. From turret to tail, this thing was 15.4 meters long, or over 50 feet, making it longer than a T-Rex, and just under the length of 3 Felucian Jelligrubs. Its impressive size didn't stop it from sprinting around the battlefront, with a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour, or about 37 miles per hour. While that might not seem fast, the top speed of an Abrams tank is 45 miles per hour, and that thing is on treads. The AT-AP is still faster than the Separatist's favorite tank as well, the AAT, which only has a top speed of 34 miles per hour. We don't have a weight for this walker, but we do know that it had a cargo capacity of 200 kilograms, or about 441 pounds, which is just about 882 ears of corn, and only about a quarter dewback. A 2-day supply of rations was also on board, just in case the battle rages on longer than expected. With no shielding system, the AT-AP relied on its thick plate armor for any and all defensive needs. Now onto the main event of this beast, the 3 cannons. From top to bottom, we have a medium blaster cannon operated by an exposed gunner and a swivel turret, the powerful mass driver cannon, just like the one on the AT-TE, and finally a smaller heavy repeating laser cannon on the underside of the hull, which was meant for dealing with smaller threats. With all this firepower, you might think the role of this walker would be frontline armor, and we'll get into its role in a moment, but I really want to break down that big gun, the mass driver. Unlike other weapons in the Star Wars universe, the mass driver is essentially a slug thrower, firing a monstrously vicious Durasteel round that was moving at hypersonic speeds. The range was far, even further than the naked eye could see, which is why the AT-AP was equipped with a very impressive targeting system, as well as a sophisticated suite for data relay. This kind of power would require a lot of stability, and since the AT-AP was essentially just the forward section of an AT-TE, that meant it needed that big third leg in the middle of the body to provide a more stable firing platform, ensuring that mass driver hit its targets without the entire vehicle tipping backwards. It also had integral recoil compensation systems, as well as a top-of-the-line gyro stabilization system, ensuring this walker would remain standing. Because of this walker's deadly targeting capabilities and one-shot potential, the clones affectionately nicknamed the AT-AP the Sniper Tank. The ventral cannon was a repeating blaster, mainly used to fend off infantry, and the turret on the dorsal side of this thing was used against incoming enemy vehicles that came too close for the mass driver. All of this could be yours for the low price of 90,000 Republic credits, which means that you could have 3 of these walkers for just the price of 1 ATTE, and even some spare credits left over for a few hundred cups of Jawa juice. Now that we know the in and outs of this walker, what exactly are we supposed to do with it? It was not intended to be a frontline assault craft, but instead to serve mainly as a highly mobile artillery unit. Now you might think the Grand Army of the Republic didn't need any more of that, since that role was nicely filled by the AB-7. However, if we look closer, the AT-AP solves a few of that cannon's issues. First, as a walker, it can maneuver through friendly and enemy shielding, something the AB-7 could not, being propelled via repulsor lifts. This made shoot-and-scoot tactics an even more viable strategy. The AB-7 had another glaring weakness: it did not have any means of self-defense should the enemy get too close. The AT-AP once again corrects this flaw, making it a more versatile vehicle to have in your armor lineup. And we're not alone in thinking that, as many clone commanders incorporated this tank into their legions, including the 41st Elite, the 327th Star Corps, and the 91st Mobile Recon Corps, which is just a few among many others. Quell made this vehicle available well into the Clone Wars, perhaps seeing the same flaws we just mentioned in current Republic artillery, and the AT-AP quickly found its way into the Outer Rim sieges. Just as quickly, we see how the Jedi Generals misused this craft in their combat strategies. At least one was destroyed during the Battle of Horain, and their role as long-range artillery was seemingly completely ignored by the wisest Jedi of them all, Master Yoda. On the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, Masters Yoda, Luminara, Gree, and the 41st Elite were preparing for a massive droid assault on Kachiro Beach. And perhaps it was in their haste to unload the Venator that we see several AT-APs taking point alongside the infantry. Once the battle begins to rage, we still see these walkers charging into combat alongside the mighty turbo tanks. While the AT-AP could be used to support larger armor, it is strange to see it so front and center, especially as the swift Corporate Alliance tank droids are closing in over the water, and the droid gunships are swooping in through the flak-filled skies. Aside from this battle, we do see them in use in a more proper way. On Felucia, under the command of Master Aayla Secura and Clone Marshal Commander Bly, we see 2 AT-APs bringing up the rear in a column of armor. Supported by the heavy ATTE and the nimble Swamp Speeders, the AT-AP looms over the less protected AT-OT in a seemingly defensive position. This makes more sense than whatever was happening on Kashyyyk, and I'm sure this grouping of vehicles would have turned the opposing droids to scrap had the infamous Order 66 not been given out, and General Secura shot in the back by her once loyal men. It's never confirmed when the Emperor ordered the production of these walkers to end, but we do know that sometime around the historic Battle of Yavin, the Alliance had gotten their hands on a few of these walkers, heavily modified them, and sent them out into war during the Battle of Tatooine, which ended in a rebel victory, proving that this old relic of the Clone Wars could still pack a punch. Legends say that some criminal organizations made great use of this old walker, with both the Hutt Cartel and Zan Consortium using the AT-AP extensively to grow their underworld empires. By the time the First Order came into existence, the AT-AP's legacy was still being felt, as the Urban Assault Triped Transport, or UATT, was inspired by that old design from Kuat. So with its history in the books, let's see what we can learn behind the scenes. George Lucas himself requested that the armor of the Clone Army be diversified for Revenge of the Sith, and so the AT-AP was born. Initial concepts for this walker were done by author and artist Alex Yeager, who called it the Pod Attack Walker, or PAW for short. And much like the UT-AT, the AT-AP does not appear in any on-screen Star Wars media outside of Revenge of the Sith, its first and only appearance. As much as we love the ATTE, it would have been nice to see the full array of vehicles the Republic had represented in a show all about the Clone Wars. However, unlike the UT-AT, this vehicle does pop up in a few comics and games, most notably Empire at War. Even in the base game, the AT-AP is used by the criminal factions as their main source of armor. It also appears in LEGO Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars, as an air support option. And speaking of LEGO, the AT-AP has been brought to us by the building company on 3 separate occasions, with their latest model arriving in 2019. Hasbro also got in on the action, giving kids and collectors a gorgeous model of the walker, and a few repaints in the years following. It's good to see that despite its minimal time on screen or pages, the AT-AP has left its mark. This wraps things up on the all-terrain attack pod. Please hit that like button, leave some comments, and subscribe. It's the best way to help me out. But most important of all, remember, not always the tactical genius Yoda was. And the Force will be with you. Always. A walker with sound dampening, thermal and electronic cloaking, and a stealth system that is usually reserved for starfighters. What's up, meta nerds? This video is going to be a short spotlight about a vehicle that most people have never heard about. The All-Terrain Force Reconnaissance Walker, the AT-FRC. This comes from the Legend sourcebook Lead by Example, where we get a ton of cool details. It was made during the Clone Wars and designed as an improvement on the AT-RT. It ended up being about midway in size between the RT and the AT-ST, and is said to have a similar speed. So around 90 km per hour or 56 miles per hour, almost twice as fast as the armored assault tank. Like all the walkers, it was manufactured by Kuat Drive Yards, and despite all of its tech, it only cost 75,000 credits. Designed to be used by the ARC Troopers, it is specialized around stealth and efficient target elimination. 2 ARC Troopers would be seated in the cockpit, with the driver/gunner seated up high and towards the rear, and the dedicated reconnaissance systems operator seated lower and towards the front. His job was to use the state-of-the-art Fabritech Longview 341A sensor array to pick up on enemy comms and communicate that data back to HQ. This whole system was highly encrypted, and it is believed that the CIS never cracked this code throughout the war. They were never able to detect the intrusion. But in addition to concealing its comm presence, it also went through insane lengths to hide its physical presence as well. First off is the active sound baffling system, which was able to cancel out the noise of the engine and drive servos. This tech is similar to noise-canceling headphones and even technology in some cars, using speakers to send out the opposite of the waveform that was created by this walker stomping around. This minimizes the net sound wave. Then it had a dual thermal/EMP dampening system that was able to conceal some of the energy emissions, perhaps through a similar system sending out opposing electromagnetic waves. Then just to top it all off, there was an optical camouflage system. We have seen some personal cloaking devices that make you invisible to the eye, and you can also see them on larger ships like the prototype stealth ship, and starfighters like the TIE Phantom and the Scimitar. But with this walker purpose-built for ARC Troopers, we get what I believe is the only invisible walker. Keep in mind that because it could also cloak its thermal and electronic signature, and the fact that you can barely hear it stomping around, then the AT-FRC is almost completely undetectable. You can use thermal imaging to pick up a cloaked ship or person with a cloaked device, but that wouldn't work so well with this walker. So it's got its defense covered, but it also has some powerful offensive capabilities. A chin-mounted ball turret double-barreled auto blaster is designed to quickly rip through troops, and a rapid-fire concussion grenade launcher can blow apart light armor in seconds. So as you can see, this thing is mostly designed for reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines, and for eliminating any scouts or lookouts that may have discovered it. If it detected larger tanks or other heavy armor, it would most likely just try and remain undetected, and collect intel for other Republic forces. Some other interesting features is that if the reconnaissance system operator was ever incapacitated, the driver can take control of all the systems. And this walker contains an additional customizable hardpoint, allowing Republic forces to attach mission-specific hardware to the AT-FRC. All considered, it's a shame that we didn't see more of this stealth walker that was specifically designed for the elite ARC Troopers. It would live on into Imperial service as well, but the exact amount that survived decommission is unknown. What's up, meta nerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the all-terrain scout transport, everything from its predecessors, the background leading up to production, how it was used by the Empire and later forces, cross-sections, and all kinds of variants. If you learn anything new, please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see tons of new videos every week, and check out our 1,000+ video library. But with that, let's get into it. Starting with the production history, walkers have been a staple of war since the time of the Old Republic era, in various forms in just about every major faction. And though for the secret clone army, the AT-TE would be the main walker, serving as a combo of tank, artillery, and troop transport, there were many other walkers produced, from the nimble AT-RT, which could fit inside of that TE, and the AT-AP, dubbed the sniper tank, for putting an AT-TE's mass driver cannon on a smaller walker body. All these walkers would be produced by Rathana Heavy Engineering, a subsidiary of Kuat Drive Yards, which secured one of the most lucrative contracts in history, making everything from the Venators to the walkers, from the Republic through the Imperial Age, and even into the New Republic era, after breaking the company up to make it more politically palatable. Can't have the taxpayers thinking their economy and history were so tied to the military-industrial complex after all. It was on Jabeam that the galaxy would first see the AT-AT and AT-XT. The more nimble support walker for lighter armor and personnel that would spread out to secure territory that would be anchored by the AT-AT Big Brother, who could also remove any obstacle for them, be it a terrain issue or heavy enemy defenses. The XT and AT-AT were not mass-produced during the Clone Wars, and would end up being prototypes for their Imperial iterations. The XT was way more advanced in many ways, with a plasma shield generator, twin proton grenade launchers with a total of 18 grenades on board, but it was not as fast as commanders would like. And I would imagine there were logistical and maintenance issues with this, packing in too much tech, and of the wrong kind for this sort of vehicle. Though it was used effectively on Renvar and Thule, it would be most remembered for being the stepping stone for the AT-ST. Though much of Kuat's manufacturing was done in their orbital shipyards, they also had countless facilities across the stars, and the main AT-ST production site was on Balmorra. After many prototypes, the final mass-produced production version would come to stand 9.04 meters, or 30 feet tall, and had a width of 4.5 meters, or 15 feet, and a length of 6.4 meters, or 21 feet, giving it a good wide base and stable proportions, while being nearly 3 times the height of the RT and less than half an AT-AT. While taking it up from the XT's speed of about 50 km per hour or 31 miles per hour to 90 km per hour or 56 miles per hour, which is 1.5 times the AT-AT and TE, which honestly is still an insane compliment to those behemoths, which could create rolling earthquakes sprinting faster than top-speed humans. The ST weighed 12,100 kilograms or 13 tons, which is 15 Dewbacks or 9 Honda Civics. Its cost was exactly half an AT-AT at $75K, which again might be a more impressive testament to the Big Brother. Let's look beneath the Durasteel plate armor to see what you got. Working our way up from the bottom up, these engineering marvels that are the foot pads. With a ground impact sensor, it is receiving detailed feedback every time the foot hits the ground, about what is immediately underneath it, but also pulsing out to scan the terrain ahead, reading density and 3D mapping of its environment, with software developed from the movements of living creatures, synchronized with a powerful gyro stabilizer coupled to complex locomotion systems, which all allow it to sprint through terrain like a native animal to that world, receiving even more data than an organic, and making quick adjustments to each step. The pilot only needs to move forward, and the system calculates where exactly each foot should land, doing all that extremely quickly in between each step, at 56 miles per hour through rubble-filled streets of urban combat or tree-scattered foliage of the thickest forest floors. If the system did read that they needed to cut through something like a fence, there were specialized cutters on the tip that allowed it to clear the path for itself or ground forces. The walking system also relies on a sophisticated shock-absorbing system within the legs that are crucial for stabilizing and handling the impact of running through these terrains, coming up to a knee joint that connects to a second knee joint, which, because it is forward-facing and an obvious weak point, it does have this extra joint shielding. The last part of their intricate leg system doubles back to have a better center of balance, putting all that weight in the middle. I know it isn't as flashy as weaponry, but I hope you see why engineering a scout walker that can be dropped on any battlefield across the diverse terrains of the Empire, and knowing you could trust it to full sprint through anything, means that this vehicle will fail or succeed all based on how well these legs work, with this simple armor plating covering up one of the most impressive features of any walker out there, as the rest is somewhat standard engineering that had been mastered for centuries. The drive engine was located at the base, and is powered by these 8 individual cells that are inserted here. These were disposable, like big batteries, that were required because there simply wasn't enough space to fit a larger power generator. There were 2 more cells for redundancy to power the cabin gyro. We are told that this did limit its range compared to other large walkers, but we get no exact numbers on its range. Though with strong Imperial supply lines, I'm sure this was rarely an issue. The exhaust is here, and this section houses the radiators, while the gyro system neck allows it to rotate. But even if physically possible to turn 360 degrees, the stabilizing software wants the legs to turn with it, so it only has a 240 degree head movement, which ends up being another way that this thing takes on an organic look, leading to the nickname the Chicken Walker. The chin-mounted guns are 2 Tamanback MS4 twin blaster cannons, which had a range of 2 kilometers, and were strong enough to blast apart trees, punch through some simple structures and light armor, and definitely evaporate enemy infantry. Its left cheek sports the Yalv Gunsmith's 88i twin light blaster cannon, which was more for just personnel, though it did have a 360 degree firing arc, which could be used with the sensors to fire precisely even behind the walker, which would be great for taking out a brave rebel with a rocket launcher, hoping to take a shot from some window or pop out of an alley, only to have this blaster spin around and melt their face. while the right has the Dimec DW3 concussion grenade launcher, with at least 3 grenades packed in there, whose trajectories could be automatically calculated to work with those terrain scans generated by those unassuming feet, working harmoniously to allow it to deploy a grenade right through a window, or sink it over a valley or in a thicket, as well as target specific crucial areas on vehicles. A rapid triple grenade burst could allow it to punch above their weight and take out some moderately armored craft. Still not the firepower of a proper tank, but usually more than enough for any rebel fighters that they would come across, as the only real thing most rebels would have to stop this would be shield generators. The thickest plate armor is right on the face, with these small command viewport eyes, and a sensor right in the middle that works with the sensors on the back to create a state-of-the-art 360-degree holographic display of the environment that can be seen through the ATST pilots' headsets or projected in front of them and manipulated, giving them a sort of out-of-walker body experience, where they could float around their environment, zoom in on things, mark enemies and plot terrains, all while the other guy was focused on moving or firing. I'm sure the last thing these imps worried about was radiation, but if they survived the war and lived on to long age, they might see the effects of having their backs up against these massive array of energy converters that are used to charge those shots. Though they are spoiled with the simple handrail on top, which is more than any Death Star worker can ask for. And the way you get in is through a simple entry hatch, while this raised section is the air conditioning, which is probably the most mind-blowing piece of tech on here to most Europeans. They were often used to protect the flanks of larger assault walkers during major ground operations, where they supported heavier walkers like the AT-ATs by eliminating resistance pockets and clearing dense terrain such as small canyons and cities along invasion routes. The 2 viewports of the command cabin were purposely designed to give the viewer an eerie sensation of staring into the face of a soulless beast or oversized combat droid, and the locomotion computer in the command cabin could autonomously drive the walker over even ground. Though a skilled pilot was necessary for navigating the most complex terrain, you still get the automated micro-calculations of each step, but the human pilot would be able to avoid more nuanced issues. Despite the speed and agility, the walker's offensive and defensive capabilities were compromised. It's playing a bunch of roles at once, while not excelling at any particular thing. Not being a smaller scout walker like the RT, or the firepower of the AP, was only effective against lightly armored targets and at pretty close range. Of course, its armor could withstand small arms fire, even some grenades, but not vehicle-mounted laser cannons, missiles, or heavy ordnance. And to help maintain speed and agility, the armor didn't cover the entire frame, and this exposed gyro system beneath the command module was exposed, and vulnerable to attacks that could destabilize it, while deep trenches or cable lines at the height of its ankles or knees could also cause it to trip and fall. And ATSTs required constant maintenance, having the highest maintenance per hour record in the Imperial Army. The Ewoks of Endor found that they were vulnerable to anti-Gorax traps, such as ramming logs that could crush the cockpit, and like we saw, it could be hijacked. And when commandeered, its cannons could penetrate the armor of other ATSTs, while in rare instances, they can actually leap during combat. And we get the somewhat random, but could it not include stat, that each leg weighed 1/4 of a metric ton, or 551 pounds. When after the Battle of Hoth, rebel tacticians learned to ambush and immobilize ATSTs by having a well-placed rifle shot that could destroy the gyro system. This walker was highly modular, capable of switching weapons and tools for various battlefield roles, which we especially see with some of the variants, but even on what was considered a standard ATST, just changing the weapon slots could include a top-mounted gun turret, mortars, side-mounted rocket launchers, grenade launcher mounts, communication antenna, additional armor plates, and a winch system. And during the construction of the Imperial base at Endor, some AT-ATs had their chin guns replaced with metal clamps to clear trees for construction. Blizzard Force used ATSTs during the Battle of Hoth, and they were specially modified for polar climates with ground-penetrating sensors to detect permafrost instabilities, and they were able to relay that information to the AT-ATs, which seems like a very small piece of data, but it was absolutely crucial to this assault. And the walkers of that unit had an insignia of a horned helmet. Wedge Antilles hijacked one during the Battle of Debrillion and used it to infiltrate an Imperial super laser facility. And during the Battle of Endor, Ewoks found that by rolling logs, it didn't matter how advanced your computer system was, there were no micro-calculations that would keep it from falling. Despite being purposely made for all terrains, the scars of Endor ran deep through the Imperial Remnant, who made it a policy to never deploy them to any forest or jungle worlds. But even just overall, AT-ATs were used less extensively after the Galactic Civil War, though the New Republic era would see them and their big brother being used by local planetary defense. And of course they were captured by countless forces from local governments to pirates, with the best case being this one. There's a ton of great visual storytelling going on here with the Klatooinian raiders captured AT-ST. Going from the top down, we have the Cord holding the eye open, Cord's holding the extra side armor in place to protect this crucial area, knowing anything piercing this would turn it into a firework. Armor plate over the left cheek weapon, which itself is not stock, and has an anti-vehicle missile launcher. They attach this floodlight, which looking back is crazy that this didn't come stock, and these X's mark each time that it stomped an enemy. This web looks like it could be used for light cargo storage, and it holds in place this tarp that's protecting a rusted elbow joint, in an attempt to keep this relic lasting as long as possible. I would imagine this was the result of some sort of damage since this is only 5 years after Endor, and it shouldn't be rusting out this soon. Or it's just more evidence of the sneaky ways they cut corners on quality, having some high-tech parts, but specific parts and materials failing, and requiring that extensive maintenance mentioned before. Moving inside the cockpit, we see the merging of supernatural powers with tech. They have Wookiee fur seats, but that's just for comfort. It's really on the entire back wall that is filled with spiritual objects from amulets to talismans, all meant to boost the stats of the walker, with different spells and animals used for buffs to agility, speed, strength, and accuracy. Magic emanating from dolls to human hands, and the heads of a stormtrooper, Ewok, Gungan, and Toydarian. Well, even the paint job color has symbolic meaning, and the fountain of the ancients war paint across its face. We get the great line that, through experimentation, they found out that the pilot and gunner should not partake in this sacred spotchka drink, a ritual where the warriors usually consume this alcoholic substance before battle. And we see that the original pilot was kept alive, living a horrific existence as a slave of these alien cultist raiders that keep him on a leash and force him to maintain the walker. Everything from high-tech jobs to cleaning the mud out of its feet, which on this world must have been a constant task. These Klatooinians cross paths with the Mandalorian Din Djarin and former shock trooper Cara Dune, which led to an intense battle. Which ended with this walking intersection of primitive and high-tech cultures being reduced to scrap by the grav charge. As for variants, there was the STA for Assault, which had longer legs and more refined gyro balance system. The KT, or Kashyyyk transport, is a testament to how deadly this world was, from the wildlife and plants themselves to the Wookiees, even just the environmental conditions of the Shadowlands, that required this great increase in weaponry and all these lights attached to these massive arms. These packed net guns, since the Empire really needed to torture Wookiee resistance leaders to try and break up these fiercest of rebel cells. It was even used to try and capture Leia once. The CT, for construction transport, has its weapons replaced by tractor beams and used for construction inside of the first Death Star, where they showed that in a pinch they could be used as weapons to hurl things at enemies or try and move the target itself. The RCT, or Riot Control Transport, dramatically changes the head, with weapons extended out on these arms, and worked as anti-rebel PR, an Imperial radicalization device if you will, as every time these things faced combat, you could expect these pilots to be killed easily, so the many friends and family would come to hate resistance fighters. A great PR conversion rate in Palpatine's eyes, strong loyalty at the low cost of 2 lives. MP was for missile platform, containing these 2 boxes of 4 missiles on each side of the head, and a chin-mounted chain gun, which is just fun to say. So that's it for the breakdown. As for behind-the-scenes facts, an early concept for the Scout Walker appeared in the Revenge of the Sith comic adaptation based on Episode 3, with concept art done by Ryan Church. The RT was referred to in the script as a modified Scout Walker, which might suggest that it was the design of its foundation. AT-ST models were included along the AT-AT in Empire Strikes Back, though it received some cosmetic changes in Return of the Jedi. They appeared in a ton of different video games, with sometimes some non-canon changes for fun gameplay, but definitely its best appearance is in the non-canon expansion for The Force Unleashed 2, extending the Dark Side storyline, where Darth Vader commands his Dark Apprentice to eliminate the rebels on Endor. Chewbacca takes control of an AT-ST, attempting to block the player's path to the Endor shield bunker. Han Solo fires a rocket launcher at the Apprentice, but he uses the Force to redirect the rocket into Chewbacca's walker, before jumping onto it, prying open the hatch, and forcing Chewbacca out, leading to a battle where he overpowers Chewbacca and uses his body to shield himself from Solo's blaster shots, forcing Han to cause Chewie's death. The Apprentice then leaps onto the bunker roof and kills Solo by impaling him with a lightsaber. If you made it this far, please hit the like button, subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, You can make fun of the chicken walker all you want, but have fun trying to hit it with an RPG without getting 360 no-scoped in the face. And the Force will be with you. Always. These things are proof that you can have great action scenes that are guided by the lore, not breaking it. What's up, meta nerds? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the All-Terrain Armored Cargo Transport, or the AT-ACT. We will do a complete breakdown of its stats, see how it was used on multiple planets, and end with some behind-the-scenes facts. The AT-ACT was produced by Kuat Drive Yards, the company that produced almost all of the walkers for the Republic and Empire. Though technically not for sale, word on the HoloNet is that these run the Empire about 125k a piece, just over twice the cost of a TIE fighter. At a glance, the AT-ACT looks like it's just a simple variant of the AT-AT, but it actually has some really big design differences. For starters, you got the size. The cargo transport had a height of 31.85 meters or 104 feet, making it about as tall as an AT-AT with an AT-ST standing on top. And at 34.9 meters or 115 feet long, it was 14 meters longer than the standard AT-AT, being more than an entire X-Wing longer, space that was all used for this large cargo bay. This area was able to carry up to 550 cubic meters of cargo, which could hold a total weight of 5,000 metric tons, about equal to the weight of 6,135 dewbacks. If it showed up here on Earth, it would stand taller than a 10-story building, be about half the length of a 747, have the cargo space of 16 20-foot shipping containers, and haul more cargo than you could fit on the backs of 46,000 horses. They had these specifically designed cargo pods that were used for transport, which had this distinctive orange coloring, a modular system that allowed these pods to be picked up by other ships and vehicles. And we can even see that they were designed to be taken off with this conveying system. This additional height did provide for a longer stride, but came at the cost of structural stability. U-Wings at the Battle of Scarif were able to exploit this weakness and bring the whole thing crashing down with a single mounted Roba M45 heavy repeating ion cannon. Whereas on Hoth, we saw that the more powerful P-Tower laser cannons proved ineffective on a standard AT-AT. So how is this possible? Well, it is due to a very important difference in the design of this cargo walker. To provide extra power to move this enormous cargo, the AT-ACT has stronger engines. Which is simple enough, but to help with the fact that all of this new weight is set on top of longer legs, the load would be supported by an electromagnetic tensor field. A tensor field essentially nullifies the weight of gravity on objects, making them a whole lot easier to transport. Tensor fields aren't often mentioned in Star Wars lore as much as other types of technology, but you have seen them used before. Some examples of other ships with tensor fields are the C-9979 landing craft, which would generate them in their wings, in order to prevent them from sagging under the extreme weight of all the AATs. And a tensor field failing was the culprit of the invisible hand breaking in half during the Battle of Coruscant, as the ship simply couldn't handle the gravitational pull without one. And with the AT-ACT, we see that the tensor field generators are in the knee, right where the gunner is aiming. With all those ion shots on target, the complete weight of the walker is now bearing down on this single leg. The full, non-nullified load proves too much, and so we don't see it exploding in a ball of flames, but buckling and snapping from supporting too much extra weight. A cool little detail that shows how action can be logically guided by well-written lore, not just dismissed in favor of action scenes, which is so often the case when it comes to things like shields, where we simply have to say that the plot willed it. Its large cargo hold was monitored by stevedore droids, which we unfortunately don't have a current visual of them, but they would help to divide the loads on the walker to make trips more manageable, as some of these experimental materials are described as ultra-dense. And some other interesting things to point out is that the red glow is from an infrared force field generated in the cockpit. The air filters for the vehicle are located right behind the head on the main body, and these walkers use the same solid fuel slugs like we saw in the AT-AT. On board the ACT, you would have a crew of 2 and space for up to 10 passengers, which is 20 less than the AT-AT. Because of its cargo role, overall it had much less armor, but the section just over the cargo container is reinforced. And despite not being intended for assault, it could still defend Imperial assets, coming with 2 Tamanback MS-2 heavy laser cannons, which would be able to blow apart enemy infantry and easily punch a hole in any attacking ground vehicles. The first time we see the AT-ACT in use is during the numerous construction attempts of Fortress Vader on Mustafar. The Sith Lord consulted an ancient Sith ghost known as Momin to help in the construction of a building that would focus darkside energy. The design of the fortress would start off being rather different from the final version that we would see, with each of its predecessors having a very unlucky history, each being destroyed in some unforeseen way. This would happen 8 times, with the 9th building being the one we see in Rogue One. Due to the harsh nature of Mustafar, Vader would use AT-ACTs and OICTs to build each of the different versions. These would be very useful in safely transporting building materials across the hazardous hellscape. Not only would the lava be dangerous to typical vehicles, but on several occasions, the troops and vehicles stationed at the construction site would be attacked by the local Mustafarians, who weren't too thrilled with a Dark Lord of the Sith plotting his castle right on their home. On one occasion, 3 Force-sensitive Mustafarians would use their power in an attempt to flood the castle with lava, killing off almost all of the Imperial troops and destroying most of the vehicles. Vader would be able to survive the attack by using the wreckage of an AT-ACT that had been swept up by the lava. And so Vader has this vehicle to thank for him not losing any more limbs to the fires of Mustafar. The next time we would see this walker would be on the tropical paradise world of Scarif. Here, the AT-ACTs were used to transport heavy cargo and materials across the shallow waters surrounding the Citadel, a highly secretive research base as well as an archive for the Galactic Empire. In the Year Zero BBY, the Rebel Alliance would mount an attack on the Citadel in a gambit to gain access to the Death Star plans. The rebels would infiltrate the compound using a stolen Zeta class, and a ground battle would ensue. The rebels would then come under intense fire from at least 4 AT-ACTs. This would turn the tide in the Empire's favor, but the victory was cut short when several rebel starfighters would get past the shield ring. These starfighters easily destroyed all the walkers, paving a clear way for the rebels to the Citadel. This battle showcased that when against something light like infantry, it was able to defend itself from small arms fire, and even take a rocket directly to the head, just shrugging it off. But due to its overall lack of armor, it is at a heavy disadvantage to purpose-made starfighters. The X-Wings having more firepower than most starfighters, and packed a way bigger punch than the T-47 airspeeders on Hoth. These could also be seen on the shipyards of Kuat Drive Yards, transporting materials for building the weapons and ships used by the Empire. Like its use on Scarif, these wouldn't see any action until the facility came under attack. 5 years after the Battle of Yavin, the New Republic launched a bombing campaign against the shipyard ring, in an effort to cut off the Imperial remnants supply to arms and armor. KDY would be forced to use any available assets they had to fend off the New Republic starships. AT-ATs, AT-STs, AT-ACTs, and even the remaining AT-TEs would be used in the defense of these shipyards. But they would not be able to keep the New Republic at bay, and Imperial forces eventually surrendered. And some of these also saw service on the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk, where they were used to transport building materials for new Imperial bases, and even transport some Wookiee slaves. After the fall of the Empire and 5 ABY at the Battle of Jakku, Imperial forces on the various worlds across the Empire would surrender and leave. One AT-ACT would be left behind on the Wookiee homeworld, where it would slowly deteriorate and be covered by the natural environment. By 7 ABY, this AT-ACT would be almost completely covered in vegetation, and Han Solo would come across this walker during one of his trips to Kashyyyk. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. It first appeared in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and the tale of it being used on Mustafar comes from the Darth Vader comic series, issues 23 and 24. The stories of them on Kuat came from Star Wars Insider, and Han Solo finds one on Kashyyyk in the novel Last Shot. And it should be noted that the AT-ACT has some potential inconsistencies across various sources. For starters, it's said that it has longer legs to give it a faster stride over the normal AT-AT, but its top speed is 50 km per hour, or 31 miles per hour. Whereas the AT-AT tops out at 60 km per hour, or 37 miles per hour. Perhaps its speed is much quicker than it would have been if it had all that cargo on those smaller legs, but it's still incredibly slow. As many fans have pointed out, something like the Juggernaut seems like it would have fit all of the Empire's goals while still being a lot quicker. And since its wheels are actually spinning metal discs and not rubber, it would have done fine on Mustafar too. Probably better in the marshes of Kashyyyk and the sands of Scarif. Another possible inconsistency is that with the pilots of the AT-ACT. The visual dictionary for Rogue One states that any qualified driver of the Empire could pilot the AT-ACT, and that they had no specified pilot corps. But they get this completely different look and helmet, and so if not a separate corps, they definitely went by the title of AT-ACT pilot. And just before we end, a little shout out to the OICT mentioned earlier. Currently, there is almost no information regarding it, aside from its appearance in the Darth Vader comic and a small on-screen appearance in Solo. There's just no stats or history on it. Funny enough, not even what the acronym stands for. The C in CT probably stands for crane or just cargo. So that's it for the AT-ACT. Every rebel launching an amphibious assault is gangsta until the Empire deploys what is essentially an AT-AT on skis. What's up, meta nerds? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the AQ-5 Wave Skimmer, also known as the Wave Walker. This weird vehicle is originally from Legends, but has actually made its way back into canon, funny enough, by accident. The AQ-5 is a large attack hydrofoil used by the Galactic Empire. It was developed later in the Imperial era, and wouldn't see much combat until the Battle of Mon Calamari, almost a decade after the Battle of Yavin. The AQ-5 was produced by the Hydrosphere Corporation, an aquatic vehicle manufacturer who produced the majority of the Empire's underwater arsenal. In particular, the AQ-5 was developed by the Hydrosphere's design team Beta, a notorious group of 4 engineers that were best known for the Sea Trooper armor and designing modified packages of other vehicles. Some of their packages included the Aquadon Combat Aquaspeeder, based on the T-47 Airspeeder, the CAV A400, based on the CAVW PX-10, and the formidable AT-AT Swimmer. As for its overall size, the AQ-5 was about 14 meters or 46 feet long, making it about 3/4 the length of the AT-AT, and it was likely around half the height of the Walker, meaning if it ever showed up on Earth, it'd be about as tall as a 3-story building, or about 1/7 the height above the waterline of the Oasis-class cruise ship. Its top speed was 160 km per hour, or about 100 miles per hour, a total of 100 km per hour faster than the AT-AT. Think about the fact that the AQ-5 had a similar armament, but could go 100 miles per hour faster. It's kinda terrifying, especially to anyone trying to fight these things in smaller watercraft. And although not for sale, if you knew the right people, you could buy one on the invisible market, a sort of super black market, at a cost of around 285,000 credits. For armament, the AQ-5 had 2 medium and 2 light blasters mounted right below the cockpit area. These guns did have some degree of motion, being able to swivel and not forward fix like the AT-AT. It was also armed with 2 concussion torpedo launchers, which, although we can't really see where they're fired from, they're most logically fired from the pontoons, as this would explain why these pontoons have these forward-facing holes. The AQ-5 had a crew of 1 pilot and 2 gunners, and we can presume that one would operate the guns while the other would fire the torpedoes. While the hull of the AQ-5 could actually carry a decent amount of cargo or troops. Up to 28 troops could be transported in the hull, or up to a metric ton of cargo could be carried. To all you Dewback fans out there, in theory you could bring your war mount with you for when you hit the beaches. Its design consists of a large hull with 2 outward wings that extend down onto pontoons. It had 2 cockpits, one positioned above and one directly in front of the nose. This upper cockpit is most likely where the pilot and one of the gunners would sit, while the lower hull cockpit is most likely for operating the torpedo launchers. The AQ-5's history begins around 2 ABY, where it was one of many vehicles produced by Hydrosphere's design team Beta. The first prototypes of the AQ-5s were a lot weaker than their production versions, only hitting a top speed of 90 km per hour and not having any of the torpedoes or light laser cannons. We wouldn't hear much about its service before the Battle of Endor, but it would be seen at the Battle of Mon Calamari. In 10 ABY, the reborn Emperor would send massive mobile factories, the World Devastators, to Mon Cala. There they would begin attacking the temporary capital of the New Republic, Dak. During the battle, the World Devastators would be ordered to begin collecting resources and attacking the major city, in an attempt to force the New Republic to surrender. The battle would be in the Emperor's favor until Luke, who had joined the Empire as Supreme Commander to bring it down from within, got access to the command codes to the Devastators, and then gave them to R2-D2. The little droid saved the galaxy again and issued a shutdown on most of the Devastators, disabling their weapons, shields, and engines. Seeing the massive machines now weakened, the forces of the New Republic began attacking the dormant Devastators. Sea Commandos were deployed on amphibions, a type of attack hovercraft, in an attempt to board these superweapons. The Imperial crew knew that the World Devastators were not going to last long if the enemies made it on board, so they formed a new plan. Before their shutdown, the Devastators had collected enough materials to begin producing new weapons. So the crew reactivated the factories on the Devastators in order to buy them time as they tried to get the machines back online. This is where we see the Imperials use the AQ-5. The World Devastators were able to churn out AQ-5s in great number in order to defend these mobile factories. Not expecting such a fight, the approaching amphibians came under heavy fire. The AQ-5s were absolutely devastating, as the Sea Commandos' crafts were only lightly armored and had just a single anti-personnel laser cannon. The only major threat the wave skimmers faced would be from starfighters, and even here we see the AQ-5 could absorb a good amount of fire before being destroyed. But despite their effectiveness, they were still unable to win the day for the Empire, as R2 initiated a virus in the World Devastators that ordered them to begin devouring each other. The pilots of the AQ-5s were forced to helplessly watch as these 2 superweapons turned each other into scrap. This would be the only major battle that the AQ-5 would be seen in, but it can be presumed that if ever the Empire came across an ocean planet in need of invasion, the AQ-5 would be there, riding atop the waves, guns ablazing. A customized AQ-5 was used sometime during the Galactic Civil War by an Imperial noble named Reginald Heniper Snopes III. This AQ-5 was used by Snops and a squad of sea troopers to explore a derelict alien wreck in the oceans of Spyra. The main differences between this version and the standard AQ-5 was that it was actually used for touring operations and had additional larger glass windows. Spyro was a major vacation planet that was under Imperial control, and nothing says Imperial vacation more than going on a joyride in a military hydrofoil. Despite being a touring vessel, it was still operated by the Imperials and was armed with 2 light blaster cannons, as civilians tend to get a little nervous when riding on top of pontoons full of torpedoes. The reason it still had these light blasters was most likely to ward off dangerous ocean life, as having your passengers eaten is a quick way to get bad reviews on tourism holo sites. The AQ-5 Wave Skimmer has made an appearance in the novel Moving Target, A Princess Leia Adventure, and was first visually depicted in the story Leia and the Great Island Escape, although now they're just called Wave Skimmers. The Wave Skimmers in canon look a bit different from the way it was portrayed in Legends. Its central hull looks much shorter, and the gunner's position now has this viewing window. Its armament has also been severely decreased, as it now only has 2 blaster cannons. We see them used on the planet Cessid, where several of them attack Princess Leia and her rebel allies while she's working in Operation Yellow Moon. The Wave Skimmers would heavily damage Leia's boat before she was rescued by the pirate submarine Dagadal. And so that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The AQ-5 Wave Skimmer first appeared in the Dark Empire comic series, and would later be seen in the Rogue Squadron video game in the final level. The touring version would appear in the Spyro Regatta, part of the Star Wars Adventure Journal. And the AQ-5 Wave Skimmer is only in canon completely by accident. The Wave Skimmer described in Moving Target, A Princess Leia Adventure, was meant to be based off a vehicle just called the Wave Skimmer, which was a single-person vehicle kinda like an underwater speeder bike. The author of Moving Target said, quote, "Can't speak for Cecil, the co-author, but I was thinking of the West End Games jet ski things. The Wave Skimmers he was thinking of had their first appearance in the Star Wars role-playing game created by West End Games. But when it came time to illustrate Leia in the Great Island Escape, the artist must have found the AQ-5 first whenever they searched for the Wave Skimmer." And a little side note, the planet that tourist Wave Skimmer was used on, Spyra, recently became canonized in the new novel Resistance Reborn. And the pirate submarine that saves Leia, the Dagadal, comes from the story of Jonah and the Whale. Dagadal is Hebrew for great fish. So that's it for the AQ-5. Nothing worse than watching your loved one get ripped through the wall and squished like a grape in your town square. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the UATT Walker, aka the Urban Assault Triped Transport. It has some really cool new features, and the First Order used these in a truly terrifying way. And unlike the ATST, this one may have actually been a transport. This new walker was manufactured by Kuat and Tralla, the same people that made the M6 and Capital ships for the First Order, which was a merger of the centuries-old company Kuat Drive Yards that made all the Republic and Imperial walkers. Its cost is unknown, but with a height of 6.52 meters or 21 feet, it was about 2/3 the height of an ATST, and nearly twice the height of the ATRT. As for its top speed, it was tied with the ATST at 90 km per hour or 56 miles per hour, making it about 1.5 times the ATTE. Due to automation advancements, the crew is now down to just 1, removing the co-pilot/gunner that we see in the predecessor, all while increasing the amounts of blaster cannons. There was this chin-mounted double laser cannon with targeting sensor array right underneath, and this weapons cluster on the side of the cockpit, containing a heavy blaster cannon and 2 light repeater cannons. On the other side of the cockpit was the spotlight, but of course the main event here is the CAP-5 activator arm. It can tuck up underneath the walker when not being used, but whenever the path was blocked by debris or dissidents, the UATT could handle it. The First Order went towards more specialization with their walkers, increasing the size of the AT-AT with the AT-M6, but making the UATT smaller than the AT-ST. When the First Order wanted to take control of a city without leveling it, they couldn't send in the huge guerrilla walker. But in dense urban areas, this triped walker would be able to stomp around without leveling the whole block. If civilians try to set up a blockade, the arm could easily pull it apart while still laying down fire, which was strong enough to be deadly to personnel, especially with that heavy laser cannon that could punch through any armor and overwhelm a personal energy shield, without having the missiles or grenades of the ATST that might just blow down the whole building. You also see that it's an armored passenger cabin with this entry hatch for FO stormtroopers to deploy from. It seems like you could probably fit around 6 troopers in this area. And this is a bit of speculation, but I think a lot of these design features point to an interesting way that these troops would enter and exit. See how it has these digitigrade legs that bend backwards, and we know that this top part can rotate 360 degrees. Seeing how this armored hood of the passenger section slopes down, when this walker were to sit down as low as it can, and then rotate the top completely around, the hood would come down to meet the claw arm. Perhaps the troops could climb up the hand and arm over the hood and into the hatch, while the walker could still be facing the enemy laying down covering fire. Objectively, maybe not a brilliant way to do it, but surprisingly more reasonable than a lot of other vehicles in this galaxy. This armored hood also acts as a great way to protect the vulnerable power cells from any top-down attacks that you might expect in a dense urban environment, or from an incoming fighter or gunship. When occupying a hostile city, the trooper squadron would often escort on foot alongside this walker. The armor top would protect the walker, while these extra pieces of riot armor on the limbs would protect the troops. Escorted by these troops on the ground meant that you had protection from the rear and the sides, and could provide quick eliminations to any resistance that might run up with an explosive, as running out of an alley and lobbing a sticky detonator onto the underside is the biggest threat to this walker. But it also has a psychological trick up its sleeve. Few things would be as terrifying as having this arm smash through your residence and rip you into the grip of the First Order. But to terrify all of your neighbors into submission, they would bring dissidents out into public places, parade them through the streets held high up in this claw, and either read off your crimes before hauling you away, or, more often, they would simply execute you on the spot, crushing you in the UATT's grip, juicing you into the public square as an example for your entire community. That's actually the dark extra part to that street-level escort. The FO Stormtrooper Blaster, the F-11D, has a stun mode like most rifles, and so they could easily paralyze a whole crowd if they were deemed to be inciting a riot, at which point the UATT got to play the galaxy's darkest version of the claw game. All of these tactics were used to subjugate the previously lawless Kajimi City. So that's it for the UATT, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The FO was inspired to make this vehicle from the design of the AT-AP, but instead of a long-range cannon, they wanted something that could work more like a SWAT van. Comparisons to those other walkers comes from the Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, while the UATT details come from the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary.